special meeting Saturday, February 1st, 2014. Mrs. Cropper, will you call the roll call, please?
Ms. Sanborn?
Present.
Mr. Merchant?
Present.
Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. Waldman?
Present.
Mrs. Brinkman?
Present.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Treasurer's business, Mrs. Cropper.
Good morning. Take me just a second to put board docs down and get the PowerPoint presentation up. There we go. There we go. All right. What you have in front of you is a binder. And the good news is I certainly don't intend to read all this to you today. But what I'm going to do is in the front of the binder, there's a copy of the 5-year forecast as it exists today. The sections in the back explain the line items that are in the 5-year forecast and the data trends and the future history that we used to forecast the projections over the next 5 years. So I'm going to let you know what's in here. You can ask questions as we go along, but you'll see there's a lot of data, so you're probably going to want to take it home and then let me know any additional information you'd like to have and the questions you have on it, maybe at a future board meeting. First thing I always like to put things in perspective and tell you what we're talking about. The 5-year forecast is only the school district's general fund. It's the operating fund of the district. So we're talking about the district's 82% of our budget. When you look at what you're given monthly, we're talking about the top row, only that fund. So that's the fund we're talking about. We're only talking about the general fund today. That's our operating fund. Like I say, it does comprise 82% of our budget, though. The 5-year forecast is required to be filed every year. It's required to be filed by the Ohio Department of Education. And it's due by October 31st with an update due in May by May 31st. When you look at the 5-year forecast, which is on the first page of your binder, and you may want to pull it out as we go through the rest of it so you can refer to each line item. We're going to talk about the major line items. One thing to remember about the 5-year forecast is it's a planning tool. It's not spending authority, it's a planning tool. It's our best guess, projection, estimate of the revenues and expenditures that we're going to have in the coming year. We make a forecast based on the best information that we have today. As time goes on, more information becomes available, and at that point, we adjust the 5-year forecast to reflect that information that becomes available. So the 5-year forecast is a planning tool. It's meant to be flexible. It is a guide. It is not spending authority. To give you some example, we're talking about school funding, and you'll see it as we go through. When we talk about school funding, we have actually no idea at this point in time what the state is going to give us 3 years out. Last year, we had no idea what we were going to get this year. Previous years have been decreases. It was a surprise that we kind of got an increase, and at that point, we adjusted the 5-year forecast. So it's a flexible tool. So we're going to start with the first thing we're going to look at. And as we go through this, I'm going to talk to you about some of the savings that have come up over the last year that makes our forecast picture look better at this point in time than it did in past years. So we'll talk about what we forecasted last year as we go through each line item and why we forecasted it that way and what the changes were that makes our picture look a little bit better. So the first item that we're going to talk about is real estate taxes. One of the things you see there on your first tab under A, what you have there is the valuation percentage increase and decrease from the previous years that we got in the district's 4 different types of property tax evaluation. And I'm at the paper that's behind your tab A. If you see, the first 3 columns are are real estate taxes. So we've got real estate, which includes residential and agricultural valuations. Your second column is your commercial industrial real estate tax basis. Your third column is your public utility real estate tax basis. And the last column you see there is the tangible business equipment inventories tax basis. And you're going to notice that we no longer receive revenues from personal tangible taxes. If you look, that actually was, by the state, was replaced with the CAT tax, commercial activity tax. But unfortunately for us, what that meant is tangible business personal property taxes were collected by the county. Our tax rate was applied to those taxes, and we got a portion of that. The commercial activity tax was levied by the state. The revenues go to the state, and we do not get a portion of that. We will talk on down through the forecast, and as the state was putting that tax in for a while, they gave us some reimbursements to make up, in effect, for them taking our tangible business taxes away from us. But unfortunately, they gave us the reimbursements for a few years. They're phasing it out. And you will see that at its height in the early 2000s, West Claremont got about $6 million from tangible business personal taxes. Last year, our reimbursement for the state taking those taxes away was only around $660,000. So when you talk about what's happening in our real estate taxes, a lot of times it affects other line items, and you've got to look at the 2 of them together.
May I
But-
ask a question about the second line, that fiscal year 2006?
Yes.
Why were the numbers very low in '05, the huge jump in '06, and then the huge jump back down in '07? What caused that?
What causes that? The county has a reappraisal every 6 years with an annual update, the 3rd year in between. And if you look at those numbers, think that was back before the economy tanked. And if I were to give you a 20-year history of West Claremont's taxes, when there's a reappraisal, 10 to 12% increase in valuation was not unusual. So I went back to the year I started on a lot of these things. I'm not as familiar as the data further back, and as the data gets further back, I wasn't here. A lot of records, don't exist in detail. But in normal economic times, West Claremont's would have looked 12, maybe 1, 5 or 6, because when you look at the 5 then in fiscal year '09 for an update, so every 3rd year it would be about half of what it was every 6 years, and that's what a normal progression would look like in property taxes. But
We've not seen that.
yeah, these last 5 or 6 years have definitely not been normal.
Well, they
So-
weren't normal to start with. They were bogus numbers, is why we've seen the drop. It was
You think
the
they
housing-
were?
The housing bubble was overinflated. The policies from the Fed drove that. And we've had a major correction in 2008 when the housing bubble burst, because we were giving people houses that couldn't afford them.
And that all fits into the
Impacted the-
recession. I'm sorry?
It's negatively impacted our ability to collect.
That it has. It has negatively impacted it has negatively impacted our ability to collect property taxes. In reality, I can tell you it's not supposed to happen that way in theory, because property taxes are a result of 2 factors. It's valuation times millage, and property tax levies are set to generate a certain amount of funds. And we all have talked about the effect of House Bill 920, which was passed in the late 70s, that says as property goes up, property that is what we call carryover property, property that's in existence at the time property tax levy is passed, carryover property, when that tax is passed, that property, as it goes up in evaluation, millage goes down, so it still generates the same amount of taxes. Well, the reverse of that should have been true, but unfortunately, we didn't see that happen. There are a lot of other factors. When you look at real estate taxes, you have to take into effect that with the economy and what's happening, delinquent property taxes went up, and that impacted our collections. And if you want to look at the dollars, because I know a lot of people like charts, I, however, like to look at the set numbers and what actually has happened and what are collections. And if you look at that, that is the last page in your chart number A. So if you look at that, you'll see what we actually collected in property taxes is in the second column. First column is the fiscal year. Second column is real estate taxes collected. Third column is tangible personal property taxes collected, and you can see the phase out there. You see the high in fiscal year 6 that I talked of was actually closer to 7 million, 6.9 million there. You see the state reimbursements, and you see that phasing out as we go down. One of the things that I want to point out that is we're always going to have to remember to talk about, I actually show fiscal year 13 two different ways. Remember what we did at the end of 13 with fund balances dangerously low. We requested an advance of our 2014 property taxes. So if you see, I've denoted there that when I look at trends, I need to remember to take that 2.3 million out of 13 and put it in 14, because it certainly looks like property taxes shot way up in 13 and way down again in 14. So we need to make an adjustment to that when we look at trends. And as I said, I tried to make this presentation as clear as I could, and we're going to talk about state reimbursements of taxes later. But what I wanted to show to you is when you talk about increases in state funding, the state included the reimbursement that they gave us for these property taxes. They didn't mention the fact that they took the tangible business personal taxes away from us. So I wanted to show you the revenue stream as it relates and what actually happened in this spreadsheet.
But if we look at that, at those numbers on the general property real estate tax, that has remained fairly constant.
It has
34 million.
remained fairly constant, but this is one of those times I'm going to stop just a minute and point out something that made our balance be a little bit more positive this year than we expected at the end of 13. If you look at collections, starting with, let's look at fiscal year 9. We're at 34.9, 34.3, 34.3, 34.0, and the economy is in a bad place at that point. What I put in my projections to be collected in 2013 was 34.0. I held it constant as with the year before. Now, hindsight's 2020. We're looking at, we got 800,000 more than I had forecast. But put yourself back in that time. What would you have forecasted? Looking at the numbers I've given you, what would a reasonable person have said we are going to get in fiscal year 13? Remembering that I always, especially given our fund balance, are going to make conservative projections. It's one thing coming to you and say things were better than expected. It's another one coming to you with our fund balance and saying, oh my gosh, as you see from going from 10 to 11, It could have just as easily gone the other way, and that's not a chance we can take. So school district projections are conservative. And like I say, there's 800,000, boom, that went into our ending line that I had not forecasted that way.
But if everybody was paying their real estate taxes, that would be a constant number.
Exactly.
I mean, the differences are fluctuations from delinquent taxes, right?
It's fluctuations from delinquent taxes. It's also people going to the Board of Revision and getting their home values lowered so that their taxes are lowered. And that's another thing that impacted this one. Typically, they don't make this big of a difference, but in 2013 it did. The big Duke Energy case where they disputed their tax values was settled in was settled in 13. It started around 08, 09. So it was settled in 13, and the Duke Energy settlement is $160,000 of this $34.8 million. Again, that's not something that anyone could have forecast. When will this case settle? Had it continued to go through the courts, it would still be going on for 5 years. So it wasn't a court ruling. They settled out of court with the counties. So, but anyhow, that was 160,000 of it. The other thing that adds to property taxes collected is new construction. So this is going to be another thing that you have to consider, and I'm going to ask you to go one page back. And you'll see, you have this chart in your book. This gives you the history of new construction, and it is just one page back closer to the front than the page we were looking at. So if you look at what has happened in this district in terms of new construction, which will add to property tax, you will see that it's kind of reached its low point in 2012 and has shot up a little bit more in 2013. So hopefully we have seen the worst of the recession and we are getting ready to come back. So while I said that carryover property in existence at the time of property tax levy is passed, does not increase revenues, new construction does. New construction is added to the rolls and it gets applied to the tax rate. So it will increase revenues.
Until they level it out, because we're only allowed to collect so many dollars.
That's true of emergency levies. That's not true of continuing levies. An emergency levy is for a set dollar amount. A continuing levy is set on the carryover property in existence at the time the levy passes. So on continuing levies, new construction adds dollars.
And there's nothing in here, so we got nothing from the death tax. I don't see a drop when we lost the death tax, so we weren't getting anything from death tax.
We weren't getting anything from that, no.
The revenue that we lost via the tangible personal property taxes, we really never had a way to recover from, and so the only alternative has been to reduce.
Exactly, that's a good way to put it. When the revenues have gone down, and unfortunately the state expected school districts to find other sources of revenues, and unfortunately levies are pretty much the only other source of revenues available to us.
$7 million is a big chunk of money
It's a big chunk of money.
every year to see that much less, big bucks.
And to replace that would take almost 6 mills, because a mill in our district raises approximately $1.3 million. So, yeah.
And we've heard from the community and a lot of people asking questions, well, why don't you impose a sales tax or something along those lines? And because we're a township, or
School districts don't
All right,
have
that's
the
what I meant.
authority to levy sales taxes. Now, the county could levy a sales tax and give it to the schools. I only know there is one county up north that does that, but it would mean a sharing of the sales tax amongst the school districts in the county, probably based upon ADM. I think the reality is West Claremont and probably Milford have the majority of places where that sales tax is collected. So we're talking about the revenues that people in our community that patronize our businesses. Our revenues that happen here will be going out, whereas we keep all of our property taxes. So there is a,
It would take the county to do it.
It would
We
take
could
the
not
county
as
to do
a
it.
district.
it would take the county to do it.
But that money then is shared through all the districts in the county, not
Just
just
us.
Not
based
just-
on where the,
Right,
money is
not just
spent.
based upon where the money is spent, exactly, exactly. And like I say, there is one county, it's way up north, there's only one county in the state of Ohio that does that right now.
But the
So,
bulk of the businesses are in this, between us and Miami Township anyway, so
Yeah.
people are spending money in our township from, there's no grocery stores in Batavia, so they
Yeah.
have to come here or Amelia to get food.
and that is a good point, those residents would be patronizing the businesses in our area.
No tax on food.
The only other levy, and of course it's, I know Mrs. Brinkman's familiar with our try on that, is an income tax. The board does have the authority to ask the electorate for an income tax. So it's,
and there are two options on that where you can bypass retirees.
That was the
exactly,
alternative.
that's called earned income.
Yeah.
There's a straight income tax, which just taxes all income, and there's an earned income tax, which is not on retirement income and exempts certain types of pensions and income and dividends and things like that.
Do you know how much difference off the top of your head there typically is with one versus the other?
You know, I know that when you go to put that on the ballot, the State Department of Taxation can send you that information just like that. They tell you how many mills equates to 1% of income. For us, when we did it, we had a 1% on, which equates to around the 6 or 7 mills of property taxes, and ours was earned income.
Okay.
And of course, earned income will raise less per percent than just a straight income tax. But yeah,
Failed miserably.
it failed miserably, and it's not been something that we've had that we've wanted to go down that road again. It is easy information to get if that's something the board would like to see. I don't have any problem requesting the data from the Department of Taxation. So if you look at, again, and I'm going to take you back to the first tab, the first sheet under tab A there. Based upon past histories and what is expected to happen in the future, as you can see, there's no crystal ball. I've been very conservative. I averaged what has happened over the last several years to come up with a projection for 2014, and I've only put a 0.5% increase going forward, and that is a conservative projection going forward. One of the things I neglected to mention when we started going through this, I know there are going to be times when you look at the data and you think, I wouldn't have projected it that way. That should be a little higher. Or you may look at something and say, ooh, when I get to expenses, particularly when we talk about open enrollment and what's been happening there, ooh, maybe she should put more expenses in for that. One of the things that I do when I forecast is I do a reality check. I do each line item, and then I do total revenues and total expenses and do the same process that I just explained to you with everything else. I say, okay, total revenues, I look at the percentage each year that they have increased or decreased. I take into account any additional knowledge that I know is going to happen for revenues. For example, the increase in state funding. And then I say I look at it from a bottom line perspective too. So. But anyhow, moving on from the property taxes, then the next major revenue that I want to talk about is our TIF agreements. If you look at the the information behind tab B. What I have there for you is a paper that explains what a tax financing agreement is. Behind tab C, you see a graph of what our TIF agreement income has been. Also behind tab C, you have a list of the current TIF agreements in a place. And then the last sheet there is a list of our revenues that we have gotten from the TIF agreements by particular TIF that is in existence. Basically, in a nutshell, a TIF agreement says, allows our townships to exempt a parcel of property as it exists. That parcel of property as it exists, remember, has what we call carryover property. Carryover property continues to be taxed and collected as it has been in the past. A TIF agreement captures the improvements on that property, the taxes from that improvement on the property. It takes the total tax rate of Union Township. It's, as for example, because we also have agreements with Pierce, but I'll use Union as an example. For that new construction that we talked about on a TIF, it sends it to Union Township. We have an agreement with Union Township on all the TIFs that we've put in place since I've been here in 2005 that says they will make a service payment to us equal to what we would have received in taxes had it not been for the TIF. Now, that has been the decisions the board's made in the past. As we go forward, this is information for you to look at and decide if that's a practice you want to continue. But we do have these current agreements in place. We bill both Union Township and Pierce for our share. And from a financial standpoint, the school district has been held harmless. I realize there may be a whole nother psychological description, or philosophical, not psychological. There we go. You're supposed to correct my grammar.
It's early.
The philosophical things to talk about as far as the TIF agreements, but I think that from a financial standpoint, in the last 9 years that I've been here, we have made sure that we're held harmless from those TIFs.
With the change in the economy, would you expect that we're going to be seeing more TIFs coming our way?
Yes, as the economy grows, there will be more commercial builders out there. I know that in Union Township, with the change in political leadership, though, I know that some of the things that they spoke about was they were not happy with the way the TIFs have been done in the past. I'm not sure how the current trustees, what their feelings are on continuing these TIF agreements, so that'll come into it too.
Don't they usually go to the township first, the trustees, and then if the trustees, if it passes there, then they come to us and for our input and acceptance? I mean, don't we do
By law, on a TIF agreement, if they want the 30-year 100%, they do need to come, anything over 10 years, 75%, they need to come to us on any type of abatement.
Okay.
Any type of abatement, and there are a lot of them. We are not involved in the JEDs that we've seen a lot of because that's income tax and we don't get that. But there are other types of abatements, and the general rule is if any type of tax incentive is given that's over a 10-year, 75% reduction of taxes or abatement TIF, the school district has to be a party to that agreement.
I'm sorry, I have one other question. The list here is all commercial people, except for one, Jurgensen's Farm. I don't know, are they commercial as well? Why would we give a TIF to a private?
It would not have to be commercial. It could be given to a.
Residential as well.
Yes.
So any
Yes.
residential person could request a TIF?
No, it's a development, and and I can tell you one example is the new development just northeast of the EMEA, or the Olive Branch Stonelet exit on 32. Oh, I forget what the name of it. Lexington, is it Lexington Farms or
Farms.
Lexington?
Lexington Run.
something like that, that's a TIF. They TIF that, and it's game playing by the political leaders and whatever. And
Gotcha.
And
No.
I think we won't see much more of that in Union Township because of the change in leadership, and I don't imagine the county, that one on Lexington Run was done by the county, and the change of political leadership there
Halted it.
we probably won't see that either.
Got it.
And it doesn't, the law says the schools will be held harmless, but all your other people that are expected to receive taxes from that, like your library, MRDD, senior citizens, all those people take it in the shorts because they don't get their money that they should be getting. And the taxpayers voted to give these people money, and they're not getting it because it becomes kind of a slush run for the trustees or the county commissioners.
One thing I do want to point out, keep in mind there is a difference between a TIF and some other types of economic incentives. In a TIF, the landowner is still paying the taxes to the county. It just redirects who they go to, like Mr. Lewis was pointing out. So a lot of people see the residential things and say, wait a minute, that homeowner, and I'm not saying you did, Mrs. Brinkman, but a lot of people see a residential TIF and they think, wait a minute, that person doesn't have to pay the property taxes I do. No, the residential homeowner is paying those property taxes to the county. The difference is where those taxes are directed to.
Is there anything TIF-wise that's coming online that's not listed here now?
There is, and this is a point at which you may say that I have been very conservative in my increasing estimates. You will see it takes a long time from when a TIF is actually granted to when we actually start seeing revenues, because keep in mind you pay property taxes based on a calendar year, and that's 1 calendar year's in arrears. So I'm sure you see a pretty prominent name that's missing from that list, and that name is Jungle Gems.
But
Jungle Gym?
They're not CHIP, they're JID.
They're both.
They're both?
They're both. We actually have a TIF agreement with them. That TIF agreement was put in place in April 2012. When, like I say, you pay property taxes 1 year's in arrear. The county decides when to put it on based upon when all the construction is complete. Jungle Gyms has not yet been charged taxes.
In any case, we're not talking about millions here.
We're not talking about millions. We're not talking about millions. No, no, not at all.
Okay.
And that's why I've put a very conservative, I followed my increase in property taxes for that line. Okay. Oh, the next one is everyone's favorite. Next major revenue I'd like to talk about is our state foundation funding. And as you can see, that takes a major decrease from 9 to 10. One of the things that in school funding that I've given you to explain what our funding actually is. This is where I've given you a boatload of data to read, and I want to go through what you actually have. So let's start with tab D. Tab D gives you the percentage increase and decrease that we have received from state funding since 2005. Again, if you look, starting in 2008, we've got some pretty big decreases going on there. 2014, we did get a little bit more money, about 3%. And then if you look at the next year, fiscal year 15, we're capped at, we're at the cap of what they will give you for state funding. One thing I want to say is state funding does include our open enrollment in. It includes back in past years, in fiscal years 10 and 11, we received the federal stimulus dollars. So in fiscal years 10 and 11, our state funding was reduced, but we were given federal stimulus dollars that flowed through the state to make up for portions of that reduction. In fiscal year 2012, we again were given federal money to make up a portion of the state funding that was taken away. Keep in mind, the federal stimulus money and the jobs bill money came to the state of Ohio, and it was the state of Ohio that designated it would go to schools. A lot of the federal money that we get, and especially when it comes to the grants, I don't get wires directly from the federal government. I don't get a check directly from the federal government. The federal government pays Ohio, and the Ohio Department of Education is the one that determines how those dollars are distributed to the schools. So all of my interactions in terms of filing reports and dealing with federal dollars have to do with the state. So it was the state got those stimulus dollars. The state is the one who decided that they would be directed towards schools. And as bad as the decreases were from fiscal year 10, 11, and 12, as you could see, they were made up a little bit by those federal stimulus dollars. And if you read the reports in the paper, a lot of other political subdivisions, for example, the townships, there were entities that lost as much as 40% of their state funding. So from a standpoint of the state working with schools and trying to hold us harmless through the recession that we've been in, we fared better than some.
But not harmless.
Not
by any
harmless
stretch.
by any long stretch of the imagination. So if you look at D, that graphs the state funding that we've gotten historically and where we would be looking to project growth for the next 5 years. This is a challenge when school districts project their funding because while the state requires us to do 5-year projections, the state only prepares their budget on a biennium, a 2-year cycle. So I know at this point in fiscal year 14, I know what we're getting for our fiscal year 14. I know what we're getting for our fiscal year 15, and I'm going to put a caveat on that. I think I know what we're getting because I have been treasurer before in a year when in March of our fiscal year, which keep in mind, we've only got 3 months left, the state came in and cut funding for that particular year. So these are projections. The projections for fiscal year 14 and 15 are based upon what the state says they're going to send us for those 2 years. I've been conservative for fiscal year 16, 17, and 18, and I have forecasted that funding will remain flatlined through 16, 17, and 18. Now, as the economy starts to improve and gets a little bit better, we may push those numbers up a little bit, but conservative at this point in time. If you look behind tab number E, there you have a line-by-line explanation, 18 pages long, of the formula that the state uses to decide what they are going to send us. So we'll refer back to that as we kind of look at a couple other things. I want to show you what else you've got here for school funding. Behind tab F, you have what I get. This is the payment report. This is what I get twice a month. This shows if you look at the bottom line, last number over on the right, you see 474,000. That's the wire they send. School funding, however, and this is a half-month payment. School funding, however, expects you to record everything at gross. And this is important to remember when we go to do appropriations because money that I don't even get, that I have to make a memo expenditure in this report, have to go into appropriations. So keep in mind the wire that comes into our bank account says 474,000. What I record in revenues is up at the top, total state funding, 903,000. We have a couple additional aid items that are also revenues, but then you see the transfers with all the deductions. Those have to be recorded in our statements as expenditures, and when we get further in the forecast, I'll show you where those actually appear within the budget. But that's important to remember that the foundation, even though they send us net dollars, I have to record that at gross, and you see that in our monthly and year-to-date financials, and the expenditures have to be appropriated.
And just to be
No
clear,
choice.
and just to clarify, when you're saying foundation, and I see the word foundation throughout this, this has to do with our business, not the West Claremont Foundation that was created by the community and Tina and all of that. This has nothing to do with that foundation.
Right, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and the state funding is typically called the state foundation, and it's nice that you clarify that because I'm so used to using the terms that I use. Sometimes I forget that they may mean something else to other people. So good, thank you for pointing that out. Behind tab G is something that is especially interesting to us because this is the worksheet. Behind, let's see, it was behind tab E, or no, sorry, D, let me get them right. Yep, nope, I was right the first time. Tab D explains to you how our state funding is calculated. Behind tab G is that actual calculation. So you can put the two together and follow this step-by-step explanation, which, you know, I should throw out the offer if you'd like to go through those 18 pages step-by-step with West Claremont's data. Be happy to do that. That'll take an hour or two just on its own, but I'd absolutely be happy to do that. I'm just going to point out a couple of things with state funding here. That things for you to watch for when you do go back and do this. A lot of people hear, okay, what's the state basic aid number? We hear state basic aid. What is the cost per pupil of a basic education? And the state of Ohio will tell you right now that's $5,745. What they don't tell you is they only fund a portion of that. And the portion that they fund of state basic aid is different for every school district. They calculate how much of that they're going to fund based upon what they call a district's wealth. And if you look at our state percentage, the state has looked at West Claremont, judged our wealth based upon property evaluation per pupil and median income of our residents, and decided that they will fund, and it's on the second page, it's letter J, state share index, 41.6026255%. That's how much of the 5745 that the state funds. The other thing I wanted to point out is as you go through state funding, they calculate for different categories of type. You can see they have an opportunity grant. And you can look down through and see that the opportunity grant is on the second page, how it's calculated. It's letter A. So you see, just to look at that second page of the SFPR report, school finance payment report, you see opportunity grant. You see that they're taking the 5745 times our enrollment, which is the A5 plus E3, times J, which is the state share index of 42.6%. And that is what they calculate. Now, thankfully, I'm not going to take you through each one of these to tell you how to do that, but go back to your first page. They do that with the various categories that you see there. They give us targeted assistance, K-3 literacy fund, economic disadvantage funding, gifted funding, transportation funding. They go through all of these calculations, which you can read. We can go about in detail later. They get to the bottom and they say, okay, West Claremont, calculated funding, $25.6 million. But then what happens is the state doesn't really have that much money in their budget, and they've capped everyone. So they say that while we went through the calculation and calculated what we thought it would cost and what our share was to West Claremont, we only have 23.3 because we've capped you. And here's where it gets a little bit tricky this first year. They say the cap is 6.25%. However, our increase is not 6.25%. It's closer to 3, because when they looked at the cap, they did not compare apples to apples. They compared apples to oranges. Last year, transportation was outside the funding formula, so you've got basic aid plus transportation. This year, transportation's included in basic aid. So they're comparing apples to oranges, saying the cap is 6.25. For us, we got an increase of 3% and we're at the cap. Hope you followed that. I can do a spreadsheet on that. We've seen one on state funding. We talked about that before. That's been one of the things that we presented in the past. Last summer when we got the budget, probably since I'm sitting here looking at 3 new people, it might have been something good to review today as well. So we can bring that back and take another look at that if you want. One of the things that I want to call your attention to, you've got calculated funding running down one column, and you've got the state funding, which then applies the cap per line item. I'm going to take you back to your big, long explanation, the school finance payment report by line item, and I want you to turn, which is behind tab E, go to page 15. And you see total state funding. It explains the cap here, and it's important to realize that it's not really a cap by line item. They just prorate the cap. So the cap is really a total dollar cap, and it's just prorated back through everything except for additional special education and career tech funding. So there's nothing magical in the cap. It's just the total cap.
So can I ask just clarifying point?
Oh.
If we look at the SFPR
Yes?
and the calculated funding, and I want to make sure people hear this. The
Okay.
calculated funding, according to the state figures, West Claremont should be getting 25.6 million, a little over $25.6 million.
Correct.
But because the state doesn't have that much money to send us, they're actually only sending us $23.3 million, the difference of $2.3 million that we're supposed to be getting from the state, but they don't have the money to send us supposedly. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, just want to check.
That's correct.
2.3 million is a lot of money,
Sure is.
and it's due us, but they're not sending it.
Do they ever catch up with that arrearage?
No. No.
The moral of the story is,
No.
we need to do away with the bureaucrats in Columbus and DC.
Well,
and keep our own
I
money.
can tell you, I would much rather have 25.6 million than 23.3, especially if it's due us.
Yeah.
Well, it's a matter of whether or not we have the services for our kids or not. It's not like we're living largely, and we'd like to live.
Well,
Even
2.3 million additional this year would certainly give us a lot more flexibility in what we can offer children.
But it's just not just West Claremont local school districts, it's other school districts in the state of Ohio as
Depends
well.
on how their financial situation plays out, value of their property and those kind of things.
Right.
And again, the state, depending upon what the state terms as their wealth, they fund more of that $57.45 per pupil.
How volatile, how,
In fact, they fund above that because Youngstown's getting almost 19 grand per student.
how
Correct.
flexible, how,
Absolutely.
in the future, I mean, if we have that type of shortage based on the availability of funds at the state level, what about next year?
Where next year the cap is, we are getting a nice increase next year. Next year the cap is 10.5%.
But what if they don't have the money? Doesn't make any difference.
Well, they have projected, we're capped at 10.5. What they should send us next year, and I could have put that in here, I didn't, is actually a lot more than that. And we are at the actual 10.5% cap next year because they're comparing apples to apples next year. One thing, sorry, one thing too that I want to point out here, a question I get all the time is, well, you've cut transportation, but the state funds transportation.
Huh.
So you can see by looking down through here, if you follow the numbers through,
1.2 million, yeah.
if we added transportation, yes, the calculated funding and transportation would go up. But would we receive any more real dollars?
No.
Really?
So,
the cap.
because we're at the cap. And that has been true of the last several years, and I know that that is a very hard concept
So
to
any
get.
additional dollars to, let's say, transportation, any additional dollars to that line item would have to come from internal resources that we may be able to find within our budget.
Exactly.
And even though the state would pay for 2 miles versus 1 mile, we don't get any more money if we go to 1 mile because of the cap.
Because of the cap.
Correct.
Correct.
Does that change next year?
The cap changes to 10.5%, but we're still, we still are capped.
Still max.
We're still not on the calculated funding, we're still capped.
We're still not getting the money that we should be getting from the state. The cap level changes, but we're still due more money than what they're actually sending from Columbus.
Thank you, Governor.
And as you go throughout the state and you talk to different school districts, they will ask you, they call them formula districts, are you a formula district, are you capped, are you guaranteed? Because there's also, what you will see is a guarantee on here. The state will not pay above 6.25 this year supposedly, but it's not apples to apples, and will not pay above 10.5 next year, but there's also a floor that they won't go below, and that's called the guarantee. So if you hear terms as you speak to your peers throughout the state, you'll hear the terms, are you a formula district, are you capped, are you guaranteed? We're capped district, so. All right, that's a treasurer term that nobody needed to know. I can tell by the blank stares. All right.
And on this sheet, you're showing 23.6 almost. What's the difference?
The difference on that is that number will adjust some throughout the year. Oh, the numbers of additional aid items have to be added to that, and those additional aid items adjust throughout the year. This summary worksheet will look different depending upon when I print it out. Just by small amounts. I have taken, and I typically use the numbers the original numbers from the beginning of the year, and don't, I don't adjust them during the year, because I tell you, I can print this same report out. This is for the January 2nd payment. When I print it out for the February 2nd payment, it'll be a little bit different. Not materially, but a little bit.
Can you, Elena, under the transfers and adjustments, can you speak to the two largest adjustments that come into play? And if you have that information, how does that compare to what we get from the state versus what we're sending out the door?
Yeah, actually, I have a tab on that, so
Okay, all right,
we'll move quickly
That's
through
fine.
the next couple tabs.
all right.
So actually, that's the next thing I'm going to talk about. But if you look behind tab H, you just see there a summary of House Bill 59. That's the budget bill that was recently enacted. So again, there's 18 pages of reading material for your leisure. And yeah, the question that Mr. Waldman just posed is behind tab I. These are the deductions that are taken from the payment report, the school finance payment report that we just looked at. I've shown you the past history there, and we've talked about it. On that. We've talked about it when we looked at the monthly financials. This is a disconcerting trend, very much so, because if you look at the open enrollment deduction, it went up by 25% for this fiscal year.
Is that primarily the elementary kids, or is it the high school kids, or is it a good combination of both?
If you look at, the payment report will tell you that. Going back to tab G, the third page there. And actually, I'm sorry, it's not on that report. I didn't put that in here, but we can get you that information. Off the top of my head, I don't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head, but we can get that information.
My guess is it's probably a lot related to the elementary and the offerings that we're providing for the kids.
It is.
It is, yeah.
Which again supports the idea we need to find a way of bringing back art, music, and PE.
And I think this is, you
And the
know,
other
as a matter of
services.
fact, this little chart that you're looking at that's behind tab I is actually in here twice. It's the only chart I have in here twice because I think it is that important. Very disconcerting numbers. It is what has the ODE monitor saying that perhaps the cuts at this point have been counterproductive, because keep in mind, these are expenditures. This is below the line. This relates back to the payment that the state is taking this money from us out of what they send us, and when I get the payment report, I have to put these in as memo expenditures, and they go into our appropriation. So yeah, this is something that as a district, we really need to look at. A 25% increase in open enrollment deduction from 2013 to 2014.
And what number is that per student?
They take from us. I'm glad you brought that up. While they only send us 41.6% of that 5748, they take 5745, they take the entire basic aid number from us.
So they're taking more than they're giving us on
They're
that
taking
student.
more than they're giving us because they're saying, West Claremont, the local share that you should have provided for a basic education, this child is getting someplace else, and we're going to send not only the state share, but the local share of state basic aid goes with that pupil.
So it's not apples for apples
Huh?
by any stretch.
No, no.
And I think there's some other numbers around that show that when you just look at the count that we've lost versus what the total dollar is, it's actually even more than that.
Well, it is, because if you add on to this any disabilities, so any excess costs, any special education costs will add to the basic costs. Yes.
I have to go back and look, but I want to say it was over 6.
And I can get you that data as well, because they're, you know, some of the pupil, some of the special ed challenges get up in the tens over, you know, very, very high, and we are charged for the excess cost if we have an open enrolled student someplace else in special ed. So you're entirely right, and we can get you those.
So it
costs.
is by no means a fair system.
No. No.
And it is in our best interest to keep our West Claremont kids in West Claremont.
I was just
We've
gonna say
got
the
to
same
do
thing.
something to stop the bleeding.
Well, here's,
Exactly.
and I'm going to bring, I'm sorry,
Oh.
I'm going to bring up, after we get done with the financial information, bring up the numbers in the enrollment report that we just got finished. And for 2013-14, and this was completed January 24th, so it's up-to-date information. We had 498 kids open enroll out for this school year, and we had 40 students enroll in. So you can, we have to do the math, but that's a significant amount of money going out versus what we're recouping by folks moving into our district from other districts.
Yep.
I know at the very beginning of the year, because I get a report from, we share information from one district to the other, the report I got from New Richmond at the very beginning of the year, those kids who have made that transfer over the summer, we were sitting around 200 kids who had left West Claremont to go to New Richmond, and that's just one neighboring district. So, yeah, a lot of folks flowing out. We are getting some, but it's not even close as far as
If everybody's
trading.
Some
leaving,
kids
why-
that went to Bethel.
why would
Yeah,
you
kids that
some went to
Batavia,
Bethel, Batavia, Milford,
Milford.
wherever, yeah.
Is there a way that you could look at the students coming in? Why are they coming in?
Yeah.
Are they employees' children and it's a convenience? Or is it because we have something that's drawing them, and what can we, do to improve or to make it more attractive?
There are a myriad of reasons why folks make those decisions. I certainly don't think many times it's about convenience
Okay.
for parents, because if they are coming in, or for the kids that are leaving us and going out, transportation isn't provided. I mean, it's not a.
No, but if
people are
you've got a teacher that lives, let's say, in Forest Hills,
Right.
they may want to bring their child to our schools because now we're on the same schedule. We have the
Right.
same snow days, we have whatever, that's a convenience. Transportation has nothing to do with it if they're driving in anyhow.
I can go back and have Mr. Stahl look at those 40 that came in and see if we can
I guess
identify
there's a
that.
good draw to the IB program.
I don't know how many are coming in from out of town, or out of district for that specific program. There are, like I said, a myriad of reasons why, but we can try to pull that
So
together.
the 40, for example, the 40 that came in, are they spread out K through 12?
Yeah.
Typically, yeah.
Suffice it to say, though, the reason we are losing so many is because of the reduction in services that we provide.
Well, the information that we collected last spring, I guess it was, when we were talking about the November levy and what that might include, the parents that we did interview, phone surveyed, indicated that the major reason they were leaving at that point was because of art, music, and PE was the number one reason. Transportation was in there as well, all day, everyday kindergarten.
We know who those students are that have left us, don't we?
We do.
So we would have the ability, if we wanted to do a direct survey with them to see?
Yeah, that's what we did in the spring of this past year. Of course, that number continues to rise as we move forward. And I suspect, unless we intervene somewhere here soon with the defeat of the levy this past November and no plan at this point to bring any of those services back, I expect that number to continue to rise pretty significantly going into 2014-15.
We've got to do something to stop it.
Well, we need to intervene to stem the flow.
But on
And
the
we have to-
request, I'm sorry, on the request of those students that want to leave us, we do kind of an exit survey. Just say, why is it you're requesting a transfer of records? So that we have that documentation. We could go back and look at those 490 students and say why.
Sometimes that's provided by folks, sometimes not. The last time in the spring when we were doing that work, we had a phone call survey done with the folks who had already left us. And it had to do with offerings, quality of education, just a variety of things. But we do have those results I can pull back up and share with the board from last spring. And if that survey work is something that the board would like us to redo at this point in the game, then certainly we can proceed with that.
And it may have also impacted the athletic department as well.
Oh, significantly, yes. That was another, there was a myriad, like I said, myriad of reasons. Athletics and the pay-to-play fee is an issue for some. It really kind of varies from family to family, but when we did the survey work in the spring, it was those items that we've talked about over the course of the year.
The downside, and particularly in the case of 3 new board members, is these decisions have to be made relatively quickly in order for you guys to be in a position to implement for the start of next school year.
Well, what I would say, absolutely, and what I would say is that the time crunch is even more critical than that, because families right now are making determinations about what they're going to do for next year. And you'll see signs, if you haven't already, pop up about parochial school open houses and those kind of, the parochial schools are
Big
recruiting.
signs.
They're recruiting.
Yeah,
Some are billboard size, yes. But they are in their recruiting season right now. And so the need is urgent to make some decisions about where we want to head.
Thank you.
One last thing before we leave the state foundation funding. I promised to let you know those areas of the forecast that helped our bottom line. And last October of 2012 would have been the last forecast before this most recent one, would have been before the state budget. And the state budget, which we found out in June 2013, I did not have any increases forecasted in the budget for 14 or 15, because remember, if I looked at past trends, it was going down. So just to have kept it level based upon past trends was not probably the most conservative But again, we're looking at 3% of our state revenues and almost $2 million next year added to our forecast when more information became available in June. Moving on then to state reimbursements. That's the homestead and rollback. Well, let me back up. The federal stimulus, education jobs bill, we talked about those. Those are past revenues. Those no more. We won't be getting any of that. There's no plans in federal government for any of that money going forward. That's just in your actual lines from past years. The next two lines, homestead and rollback, state tax reimbursement, are reimbursements that we receive from the state. The first one, homestead and rollback. Homestead and rollback are revenues that come from the state. They're calculated by looking at our residential homeowners. Residential homeowners get a 10% reduction of property taxes on levies prior to July 1st, 2013. So the state pays 10% of the bill for residential homeowners. They pay an additional 2.5% if that residential home is owner occupied. So on all levies that we put on the ballot prior to July 1st, 2013, we calculated how much the district would receive based upon a $200,000 home. And then when we went to calculate how much that homeowner would pay, we took 87.5% of that because the state was kicking in 12.5% for an owner-occupied residential house. Unfortunately, House Bill 59 did away with homestead and rollback for future levies. This line item will continue to grow at the rate of new construction on levies that we have. However, any new levy that the district would put on and ultimately be successful with would not be receiving this reimbursement from this point forward, given the provisions of House Bill 59. So this area, you can see, is forecasted to grow at the same rate as property taxes in future years. The next one, the tax reimbursement that comes from the state. That, if you look beyond tab J, that is how the phase-out of tangible personal properties was supposed to happen prior to House Bill 59. Prior to House Bill 59, we would not be receiving any tax reimbursement in fiscal year 14. House Bill 59 changed that to hold us harmless for the next couple years. So there again, information that I have behind tab J said in October 2012 that we would not be getting this revenue line item in fiscal year 14. House Bill 59 in June of 2013 changed that, added $661,000 to our budget. So again, what affected the bottom line? New information became available, information was changed that became available.
But we anticipate that going down for the future as well, don't we?
We do. We know that next year we are held harmless, but the year after that, you'll see in the forecast, I then have it reducing by 25%. I've got to tell you, that's strictly, they've said they're going to take it away at some point. They were supposed to take it away. No one knows.
Right.
You know, and that's a good point in forecast. The further you get out, the harder it is and the bigger guesstimate it is. So the later years are less reliable than the next couple of years. And that's why it's a planning tool. It's a guide. It's not actual. We make our best guess.
And this homestead has nothing to do with the rollback taxes on the senior citizens that they were going to the auditor's office and getting reductions on their property taxes.
This particular one has nothing to do
Okay.
with that. I know what you're talking about in that that made it
That was,
harder.
that was some homestead thing, I think they've stopped doing it. You had to have it done by the,
They
Remember
have,
last year?
it was an income level, and I don't have it with me, so I don't want to, 25, 30,000, and, but anyhow, if you were over 65, the first 25,000 of your assessed evaluation was waived, and they did not have an income level limitations, just if you were 65, you could walk in and get that waived. Again, they will continue that for people who have had it effective January 1, 2014, but there's an income qualifier that has been added to that, which you're right is going to make it harder for people who turn 65 to get it. But that really doesn't affect our revenues. I know what you're talking about there, but
You had mentioned that you projected on an average home value of 200,000. Do we know what the average home value of the homes we have in our district?
typically, what we do is, I estimate on 100,000, because 100,000 is a nice round number and easy for people. In the past, I mean, with technology, things have gotten great. In the past, we did that, and we continue to do that because it's a nice round number. It's easy for people to multiples. But given technology, all the county auditors, including Claremont County Auditor at this point in time, you can go look up your own property, and they've got a levy calculator on there that will tell you exactly what the levy increase will be on your home. So,
But do we know what the average home
you know what,
cost
we
in our
have
community?
conflicting information on that. I will tell you that the county auditor said the average home in our area is closer to 125. We've got realtors that are quoting a much larger number. So, I don't, you
Don't
know,
know
I
where
think
that
that the
actually
Bureau
goes.
of Labor Statistics, I should go and see if maybe they have a number I could pull down for you, because the numbers I've seen quoted vary pretty widely. The next number that we've got on there that helped our bottom line in 13, and again, I'm going to point out what helped, what went right that added to our bottom line. 2013, we got a casino payment of $179,000. We had no idea what that was going to be in October of 12. So the last October, I did not put any revenues in for casinos. I will tell you that the state, I did not feel comfortable with the numbers that were being passed around by the state. We were told at one point, for the casino advocates, were saying schools will get about $100 per pupil. Well, that didn't happen. We got around 21. Now, I will tell you, we got that $179, we got it on January 31st, 2013. The number that you see next for fiscal year 14, we're supposed to get casino revenues twice a year. We got the first half, we got $218,000 in August. I am anxiously waiting to see if we actually get that same amount again. I read the paper like everyone else who said casino revenues were down. So we're looking at a number there in revenues that we may very well not meet. And trust me, I've looked every place to see, there are no estimates of what that second payment is and when it's going to be out. We got it on the 31st last year. We're past that already, so I'm anxiously waiting. We'll keep you updated on what that second number is going to be.
Are there any provisions or somewhere hidden in here the remarkable amounts of money that the lottery was supposed to give us?
Well, you know, if you look back at the one of the reports in here, I'll have to find it for you. The state will tell you we get money from the lottery. But again, they tell you what you get. They don't tell you what they took away. We do get monies from lottery. What they don't tell you is they took away that same amount that they used to give us from the general fund. So we talk net down here because that's what we spend. They talk gross up there.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like, I guess I'm dating myself. I don't even, maybe that, but it's like the rest of the story. Remember that Paul Harvey
Yeah.
used to? So, all right, I see I'm totally exceeding my time limit here, so I'll try to speed it up as we move towards expenditures. First thing you're going to see, the next item that we're going to go through is we're going to go through the expense items. Again, we're talking about the general fund. The largest percentage of our dollars is in salaries, 51%. Another 22% in benefits, 24% in contracted services. Our pie chart looks a little different than most school districts, and that's because we contract out transportation. Transportation is a large expenditure. If a school district has transportation inside, it's going to increase their salaries and benefits because they're paying the bus drivers. For us, it's a contract. It's not a salary and benefit. So our salaries and benefits, actually, if you just compare to other school districts, are lower, but that's really why.
But I've heard conflicting reports that having our own buses versus contracting them is less expensive.
I think that this was a decision that was made in 1994 in this district. At that point, this district, when it had full-service transportation, had around 95 routes. You need 100 buses for that. And what I'm told, because of course I wasn't here then, is that was the main reason they contracted it out. They didn't have the money to replace those buses. And Mr. Waldman probably has a better estimate of what does a new bus cost?
Between 80 and 85,000. And if you get a handicap bus, you're probably looking at in excess of 90, depending on what the requirements are for that bus.
Yeah.
And how many you need.
I think your estimate with 90 routes of having 100 buses is probably a little low. You'd probably be looking at more like 110 to 115 buses for that. And at this point, the capital outlay for something like that is, it's impossible. There's no turning back. We just have to deal with what we have.
So the answer to your question, Mr. Merchant, is really twofold. Yeah, I agree like you that if a school district operates a section of their school district effectively and efficiently, it just makes sense on common ground that they ought to be able to do it cheaper than somebody from the outside, because an outside contractor now has to add profit. And when you look at some of the rules concerning outside contracting, outside contractors still have to pay into the state retirement system. So because of the legislation that surrounds outside contracting, they may be able to pay them a little bit lower salary, but then maybe their health care plan is not as good, but then you throw in the element they want a profit. Why else would they be doing it? You're right, but to go back to why this district did it, I'm told, that they had 100+ buses, no money to replace them, and they went the yearly route.
Well, when you have an inventory in buses, they're not all recycling at the same time. I mean, you factor in 10, 12 buses a year versus all 100. It would be a major bite.
The problem is that when there are reductions that districts make, typically they scale back on the number of buses they replace, and so exponentially each year you get further and further behind, and all of a sudden there's not many alternatives to try to bring your fleet up. And I believe the state has somewhat of an expectation that fleets remain not in excess of 10 years in terms of age of buses. So it's really hard to maintain that.
Yeah, it's a big hill right now, that's a fact.
Well, it's an impossible task now. I
So
don't see it.
the only control we have over busing then is to get alternative bids. I mean, open bidding process.
That's correct.
That's correct, and there's a limited number of,
Yeah, there's two, I think.
yeah.
There are not a lot of
Exactly.
And then
Exactly.
to closely monitor what we're doing and how we're doing it, what we're paying for it, to make sure that we're
Yeah.
minimizing our exposure.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, to continue down the line items on the 5-year forecast, salary expenses, we've talked about the cuts that's been made over the past several years in terms of staff. And if you look behind tab K, you will see a breakdown of our pay group classifications and the dollar amount that we've spent in each. If you look at the bottom of that sheet, you will see that I've forecasted a stable workforce going forward, which we know that as we look at staffing needs and what will come, that will have to change, and that's something that as that information becomes available, I'll need to adjust these salaries. But what this also says, when you see the assumptions at the bottom, as we know, the way we pay our staff, people retire at the top of the chart. We hire new people in at a lower rate. So even if you have a stable number of FTEs, you've got people who are higher paid leaving and people coming in to take their place that are lower paid. What we do is we look at past trends. We have about 20 people who leave per year. And if we look at the savings versus at the top of the chart versus, I actually take step 5 because I like to be conservative, and a lot of times we can't find people at step 0. So I do the difference between step 25, which is our highest step, step 5, and calculate that based upon 20 people, which is an average of who goes, who stays. And we know that's an average. If 25 people go this year, that's too low. If only 17 go, I've got too high a savings calculated. So as we learn what our actual retirements are going to be, we'll adjust that. And as you see there, one of the other things that, again, what was forecasted in last October, October of 12, that changed in December of 13. What was forecasted in the October 13 forecast is the fact that we had steps that were in our salary estimate line. And what people don't realize, and what I've shown you, if you look at the screen, just as an illustration, and these are rough estimates, we know that going into this year, like I said, in October of 12, we were not finished negotiating for the 13 year. So I had steps in our salary line. When we finish our negotiations in spring of 13 for the 13-14 year, our teachers agreed to freeze their steps. You have to remember that that took $662,000 out of the forecast for every year. When we prepared the 5-year forecast in October of 13, we had not heard from our union that they were willing to step up and take even more concessions to help our bottom line. And that has changed our forecast and added savings even since December till now. They've agreed to go year 2 and year 3 and take no steps. And what you have in there are savings that compound year after year, because once a step is given in 1 year, it's paid the next year. If it's not given in 1 year, it's not paid then the next year. So what I have in here now are the savings. And as you can see, it's $8 million. It adds $8 million over the life of this forecast back to the bottom line. And that was a huge concession by our staff in stepping up. And it did a
No
lot
question.
for the bottom line.
It's, when you look at that 5-year forecast that you had that showed that we were going to be in a deficit in 15 significantly, and to see where we're at today, I mean, there can't be enough said about what
that
the
little small
bargaining
item
units did.
for us.
Absolutely.
Yep. Can I ask you 2 questions about this report?
Sure.
in the spirit of saving, conserving, and our teachers stepping up and taking concessions and all of that, why did the board incur a $3,000 increase, year 2012 to 2013? Why would we, as a board, not also stay with that same philosophy of conserving?
Because you're paid per meeting, so you
We
would
had
have
a lot of
had,
meetings.
yeah. The board's paid, 125 per meeting that they attend. So therefore, there were more meetings that year. So it's, 125 times 5, depending on the extra amount of meetings held.
And while that's only $3,000, it's still not the direction that we should be going in. We need to revisit that. And could you also address the overtime? In year 2012, it was 3,400. In 2013, it was 12,000. Why that huge jump?
I think that one of the things that we have to watch, and we need to remember, everyone wants to cut positions, but there's jobs that need to be
The work
done.
needs to get done.
There's work that needs to be done, and federal law prohibits you from telling hourly employees, you will complete this task. That's not legal. So it could have been that. I'd have to go back and look. It could have been a position went unfilled, so we had a custodian maybe filling in a little bit more. I'd have to go back and look and see
No, I
what
mean,
that
that
specific.
completely explains it. I
Yeah.
was just,
Yeah,
how
and
could that possibly happen?
it's not unusual at all that we're gonna have a custodian or other hourly employee here on the weekends to deal with an athletic event or other activities that are going on, and you're required by federal law to pay them for their services, so it's gonna incur overtime.
Now, would some of that occur, let's say that you have a custodian that works 40 hours during the work week, and on Saturday, the PTO is gonna put on a 6-hour carnival. You have to pay that custodian his extra day of salary, but you also then have the PTO contribute
And
their
how it
fee,
would
if you
work
will.
in that
Would that contribute to
instance-
that?
How it works in that instance, school accounting, a little niche, when we get something like that, we bill the PTA, and when we get in salaries that they are funding, we do a reduction of an expenditure.
Okay,
So
so that would
that
not
goes away,
contribute.
but in the case of a custodian, overtime might arise from with all the snow we've been
Yeah.
having. If
Yeah.
Mr. Dyer needs to call them in earlier to take care of a few things, the maintenance guys need to come in, plow when they wouldn't normally be in, that would be an instance of
Yeah.
overtime, more so than the example of when groups rent out and we charge them for the custodian, that's
That
more
makes
of a
sense.
reduction.
That makes sense.
A top-
Go ahead.
A topic near and dear to my heart is the
Okay.
substitute teacher line. You've got zeros in 14.
Let me tell you about that.
Yeah. do.
Yeah.
Plus the year.
We're not gonna pay them, no, I joke, I joke.
Where's that showing up
You
now?
already showed them.
Okay, that in
On
the middle
average,
of,
we pay the least of most of the school districts anyway, so.
yeah, let me tell you, what happened with that line. It looks like, you know what, an old copy of the report got put in here. Because what happened with that is that substitute teacher line, yeah, this is an old copy got put in there, got moved. That line actually, or I have an old copy in mine, substitute teacher line that you see going down, in the middle of fiscal year 13, the district stopped paying them directly and started contracting with Hamilton County so that our subs are paid by Hamilton County. And instead of it being salary at that point, it becomes contractual services. So I've got an old copy in here of mine. Actually, my staff was helping me put this together, and with going back and forth, this line should actually be 0. And
13 should be doubled, and 14 should be estimated, right?
no, actually,
That's
14
one that- that's one
through
contractual
18 should be
service.
0.
Oh, because we're not showing it as an expense item.
It's now contracted
It's in
services.
Yeah,
contract,
it's
just the same way
contracted
with
services.
the bus
Well,
employees.
how's it paid for then? we,
It's paid out of another line item.
Remember, this is just personnel costs.
yeah.
Yeah.
We'd be adding our contracted service
Okay.
line item now.
Okay.
And yeah, I apologize for this personnel, because if you look at the total estimated in fiscal year 14, you see 32.8. If you look at the forecast, you see 32.6. The difference is the substitute teachers. Those should have been 0, and this is an old copy. I'll have to replace this for you. Because substitute teachers should be 0 as far as a salary line.
And what that allowed us to
It
do and
is on
move,
the one I have.
It is?
should be
I've
0
got an
under
old copy.
fiscal year 13 too, as well.
Oh, yours is right.
Mine's right?
You know what? I've had my book, it's wrong in my book. Yours is right.
I've got.
Mine's wrong.
Yours is wrong?
As
And
is
that-
mine.
And moving that to contracted services, quite honestly, was a cost savings to the district as we went through last school year.
Yeah.
We were able to reduce positions at the central office that we had to have to manage the substitutes. And when we went into that agreement, we also made some adjustments to the salary schedule for substitutes to bring them more in line with the rest of the surrounding districts.
Yeah.
So it ended up being a cost savings for us in the long run as we move forward.
And we do substitute classified too, don't we, through Hamilton County?
We
or
still do classified locally,
We
yes.
do, okay.
Do they offer that through the ESC?
Well, the reason why we did not do it at the time was they were not offering it. I believe that's still in process. They're still trying to get that set up. Hamilton County is looking to move that direction, and we would have to do a cost analysis at the time to see if
Yeah.
that was worth us moving that direction as well.
And the substitute classified as secretaries and
Secretaries, custodians, maintenance, those folks.
So behind letter L, I've given you some information, again, to kind of maybe dispel some myths sometimes that we hear out there, that we have teachers making 6 figures. That's totally not true, and I know you have a copy of the contract. So behind letter L, you just see the certified salary schedule is the first page. Second page is the index. The index is computed off of bachelor's degree, 0 experience, and then you see the index factors that determine what the salary is for increased experience and education. If you move on to your third page behind that, you see the teacher salary grid. That tells you how many teachers are actually on which spot on the salary schedule. So that's just some information that people from time to time find useful. Behind letter M, you're going to find the current supplemental positions that are paid by the district over the last 3 years. Remember, this is general fund. Coaches are no longer paid. We're missing all the athletic stipends out of this because they're paid out of Fund 300. And remember, we're talking about the district's operating fund. Now, when we go on through the line items, we're going to see where we do have to effect a transfer to cover some of those salaries. But this listing behind letter M is the supplemental positions that are paid out of the general fund. Moving on to the next couple of lines, which are retirement insurances. Employees' retirement is going to follow pretty much closely salaries. Both SERS and STRS require an employer contribution of 14%. The other large line item, as far as insurances, is of course the health insurance is the largest. If you look under tab O, you see the chart that shows the insurance expense and what has been happening there. Out of the 8.7 million spent on insurances, the largest part of that is health insurance. It's about 7.3 million that the district spends board share health insurance. So what has happened? There are many factors that go into what makes up our health insurance. And if you look at your second page under O, you'll see the actual increases to the plan that our district has gotten over the last several years. And as you can see, again, it varies wildly. So what do you do when you forecast it forward? You take a middle of the road.
Yeah.
You take an average, and you know that number is going to be off one way or the other, but you take an average. One of the
10%.
things that I want to mention as far as our health insurance rates, it is a large process. It's bid every year. We are with Anthem. We always get bids from United Healthcare, Medical Mutual of Ohio, and Humana are the three major players in the healthcare industry. And also we have a healthcare expert here, so I'm sure she'll chime in. But anyhow, we always get bids from them. We also have gotten bids in the past about joining consortiums. As you recall, years ago when I got here, we belonged to Claremont County Consortium. At that point, we had healthcare experts come in, do an experience study, and they determined that we would actually get better rates on our own. So we left that consortium. Over the past 2 or 3 years, we've been getting quotes from another consortium, which are more similar district, larger districts like us. And to be honest with you, on a year-by-year quote, we're coming back still better to stay on our own. We're doing better on our own than we would do in that consortium. Now, there's all kind of factors that enter into that. Those are short-term decisions. I mean, if we had we're making it on the best information we have at this time. If we were looking longer rate, there are many attractive programs that the consortium has in their plan that we don't have in ours that may ultimately affect the health and therefore usage, which drives rates of our health insurance plan. So we're making short-term decisions year by year on what's the cheapest for our health care plan. So what you see here, last year, January 1st, 2013, we got absolutely killed. We got a 23.5% increase.
So the Affordable Care Act may have some effect to this?
It definitely will have effect on it.
I mean, can you even think about projecting?
In working with them, I will tell you that our plan did have some elements in it. We didn't get hit as hard as most places will. In order to comply, though, as great as our rate looks on January 1st, 2013, we would have actually gotten about a 1% decrease had it not been for the elements that had to be included in our plan that were not there, that had to be put in according to the affordable health
Mandates.
So, yeah, absolutely, that costs us a little money. So, you know, rates are set based upon experience, which is usage. And if we had a crystal ball and knew who was going to get sick and who wasn't and what the usage was going to be.
But we're going to save $2,500 on our health care. A person.
Decent doctor, too.
I wanted to point out that in January of last year, we switched plans, didn't we? We went from one plan to another, and the teachers bared a big portion of that out of
Yes, and
pocket.
I'm glad you brought that up. Every year when we look at this, now in January, let's go back to what happened between August of 10 and January 1st of 12. What happened there is that's during the summer of 11 is when we joined forces with 6 or 7 other school districts in an attempt to, and actually Kings was one of them, but they ultimately decided not to join as well, in order to see if districts of our size could actually affect savings in joining together in a consortium. We went through the bid process, of course, Anthem, Humana, United Healthcare, Medical Mutual. it took a lot to get that bid together, a lot to go through the process, the experience. At the same time, all those school districts were wanting individual quotes. What if we stay with our plans by ourselves? So what the company did at that time was to give us an extra 5 months on the same rate in order that we could get to January 1st, 2012, because they just simply didn't have the bids done. Worked for us. What we did, though, in 2012 is we went from having a PPO and an HMO to having a high deductible health care plan. So that rate would have been higher had we kept our HMO as opposed to the high deductible plan. And that is the point at which the employees, again, had made large concessions in the terms of the benefits of their
contribution.
plans. And that is true if you look through, and that's data I didn't include, but obviously if you look back and you know what was happening with healthcare rates back, if you look at August 8, 9, back to July 05, 06, what had to happen to get the rates that low is benefits within the plans were changed. And I could go back and pull all those together, but during that time there were a lot of changes. Your co-pays at the doctors went up, number of physical therapy visits went down, co-pays on prescriptions went up, and I didn't put all that detail in there, but to keep those rates low, yeah, that is something our staff agreed to. And that happened throughout that process.
Well, another thing to point out during that process is we as the board can't say, or you can't decide, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna change our plan to this, and everybody has to accept your decision. It's a joint decision between you guys and the board, or the unions. You have to agree together on any changes. We can't just say, we're now going to a high deductible plan, everybody has a $20,000 deductible. It has to be a
Exactly.
joint decision.
It has to be a joint decision, and we're fortunate here that both our unions have agreed to the same plan. We also have our exempt and administrators follow the exact same plan, the exact same premiums. Everyone in the school district is in the same page. Some other school districts, it would be a different plan and/or premium breakdown for each group, depending. So we're very lucky here that we're on one plan. As you well know, cost savings, the more people you have, cost savings that's the best from a cost savings standpoint. Some other data that you have in this that I want to point out that goes into how much we spend on our health insurance. I believe the next page is your health care premium. So total premium breakdown between those two. Healthcare enrollment also affects the total numbers, and if you can see, obviously, at the end in the last couple of years, enrollment in our plan has gone down because we have less staff. That's kind of a no-brainer. And then for those of us who like to see real dollars rather than charts, the next page just has the real premium dollars. And again, like I say, that the insurance, especially the health insurance, is a huge expense, and I don't want to neglect to mention that, again, this is an area as we go through, I promised you I'd point out areas that cause the bottom line to get better. Insurance savings. Our staff from a year ago at this time, or year and a half ago at this time, sorry, the board paid 92% of the premium. Today, this board pays 16% of the premium. I'm sorry, 84% of the premium. The teachers pay 16%. Wouldn't it be nice? Boy, that savings would be really big if I could do that. But just by making that switch in the amount of premium paid by the board versus the amount paid by the employee in negotiated agreement, that put almost $4.5 million over the course of 5 years back in this budget. So again, our staff's stepping up to the plate, helping us out in our financial.
So with regards to salary, the elimination of steps and the health insurance increase in
We're part of
cost,
consumption.
we're talking $10 million.
I think there's an event.
Talking a lot of money, and let me tell you, everyone out there is feeling it, because don't forget, everyone out there's net pay has gone down.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking a lot of money.
These are monthly figures, right?
Which particular chart are you looking at?
Yeah,
Yes, the premium, monthly premiums.
okay.
Okay. And then your last chart just shows other benefits. And, you know, again, you talk about the other benefits just make up about 1.5 million. Medicare, workers' comp, we spend about, and let's talk about workers' comp. Workers' comp, the district spends about $260,000 on it. Guess what? This year, July, it was announced in May 2013. First time in 10 years, there's too much money in the workers' comp reserve. The state's going to do a give back. Write it down, because again, not in the forecast, 162,000 revenue into this district in July 2013 that could not be forecasted. It was based upon the governor looking at the reserves that are held up at the state, the Bureau of Workers' Comp deciding that it was overfunded and should return some to the employers in the state of Ohio. Went to everyone who pays into workers' comp. And I do have some data on that. I decided not to print that out and put it in here, but I do have some data on that if you'd like to read about that. And it was decided in May of this year. And West Claremont's portion of that was receipted to us in July 2013. It was $162,000. The last time workers' comp looked at their reserves and made a distribution was 10 years ago. So,
Did we get any adjustment on our healthcare premiums? I mean, along the line of paying into the premium overpayment? I mean, there's laws that require you to refund if you've paid too much. Did we receive anything back on that?
no, we've not received anything like that.
They adjusted the rates for workers' comp then, or
They're-
they stayed the same and just gave back what was excess?
Well, they adjust every year depending upon our experience. So, and that's one thing, I really meant to discuss workers' comp in terms of the rebate that we're getting. As far as what we actually pay and when that's bid, what the bid is, and we'll need to talk about this some more, but you pay a fee to belong to a group so that you get a group rating. The group bid is actually an estimate going into the year, and what you're actually charged that year depends upon your experience. So one of the things that you evaluate when you decide upon a workers' comp group to join is what their track record has been and what they promised at the beginning of the year versus what actually happened during that year. And those are things we consider when we look at bids and decide which group to go with and which group not to.
So if we have a lot of worker comp claims, then our insurance is going up,
Yep, exactly. Yeah,
which actually works like insurance then.
yes, it does. It is an insurance.
And do they do your audits annually on the workers' comp, or do they do it biannually?
Do they do it by, it's not something that's done on site, so it's more managed through the people who do our group, so.
Good, that's actually really good.
Yeah, so. And you know, that's one of the things that as treasurers, and I'm getting off on a tangent, as treasurers, when we talk, I've got a couple other treasurers who are talking to me, telling me how much West Claremont could save if we went self-insured. It makes me a little nervous because with self-insurance also comes risk, and yes, you save if you have a good year, but what happens if you have a bad year? So again, things that we as a district we'll need to look at.
But you'd
in
also
terms of-
probably need another full-time employee to do nothing but micromanage that process.
That's true too. You've got to take into account all the direct and indirect costs that are to come by that. So yeah, makes me a little bit nervous. Self-insurance, higher risk, sometimes higher savings. Higher savings when it's a good year, maybe not when it's a bad year, but definitely higher risk. And when you don't have much fund balance to risk, you got to play it a little safe sometimes. Other benefits that we talk about, severance. Ohio law requires that when an employee retires, you pay 1/4 of their leftover sick days up to a max of 50. There under tab P, you have past history of the severance that's been paid out and by employee group. It's no one's surprised here that our largest group per FTE has the largest payout of severance. Moving on to the last 3 items, and I'm going to cover them pretty quickly because I'm already well over my time. Maybe we should have taken this one line item at a time over the course of several meetings. But anyhow, you look behind Q. I have put that the remaining line items and expenditures, and you know what? I presented this a little bit differently than I usually do. I presented them all together. And usually I present it by line item, but that will make it faster in this instance to go over. As you can see, these are the last 3 remaining different categories. And if you look in fiscal year 15 to a total, they came up to 17.3 million. What the highlighted numbers are for you, those are the things that we talked about that the district has put in revenues and done a memo expenditure that we then have to appropriate just like it's paid. This is money that really didn't come in, but when I record it gross, and then also have to put an expenditure in. The first yellow highlighted there, county auditor fees. That's the amount the county charges us to collect and distribute our property taxes.
Just
It's a
us.
monopoly. We have no choice. We cannot bid out and find somebody else to collect and distribute our property taxes for us. We're stuck. That is how much it costs per year. They keep that. When you see foundation there, that's, as Mrs. Brinkman pointed out earlier, that's the school foundation payment, basic aid. That's what's deducted. We looked at those numbers before. Those are the numbers that have been increasing. A lot of that is the flow of students out of our district. Again, those are numbers that the state keeps that money and sends to another school district.
So they charge us, the auditor charges what, 0.5% for every dollar they collect?
Pretty much. It's, yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the actual rate. I'm not remembering it exactly, but I can get that for you. Yeah. It's a large amount of fees. People don't, yeah. And if you look, that would be in the line item other objects. It's certainly the largest amount in there by far. Going to the second page of that, when you see state administrative fees, that's how much the state charges us to send us our homestead and rollback. So they charge
money to send us money.
Huh? They charge us, as you can see in 2013, they charged us $40,000 to send us our homestead and rollback of approximately 4.2 million.
Why are there such wide swings on expenditures? Some of them, like fuel, is explanatory. We eliminated a lot of bus routes when we changed our policy there for busing, but like instructional services, we went from $117,000 one year to $4,600 the next. Why such big swings?
It depends on what I'm looking for that one, instructional, which one are you in?
Page 1, alphabetically, instructional services.
Oh,
4 down from the highlighted yellow.
it depends on what programs were purchased that year. And we also, as you look through the years, are in the process of, a lot of the past years were books and instructional equipment that is now being purchased out of 003, or, as you can see, in the last couple years, it's been items that we've cut, budgets that we've cut. So,
To maintain or remain within our budget.
exactly.
I'm hoping we're not compromising, not purchasing current textbooks when our children need current
There's a
information.
balance.
The athletics money went where?
The athletic, as you see, those three things that you see zero, those are in 300, in our funds 300, and that's what the fees were raised, and those athletic field trips, league fees, and of course for the athletic trainer and the pool rental, because of course we don't have a pool, but we do have a swim team, so we have to rent a pool. All those things in fiscal year 11 were funded by the general fund. All those things are being funded by the 300 accounts now. And when these things are 100% funded by fees, and I am working on an analysis of the fees because that is a lot of questions. The way our fees are done now is each sport has its separate account, and when a student pays their $4.95 fees, $75 of that fee goes into their sport account. That $75 covers these things. $420 go into an account that I use to pay coaches out of. The transfer that comes from the general fund goes to cover the coaches and salaries and benefits.
What do you do with the gate then?
The gate goes into their fund. So the gate goes into the sports fund. And any fundraising that they may do would also go into their separate fund. But I'll bring you
But they spend, I mean, is there a guideline for where they spend those?
well, proper public purpose, it needs to be spent to benefit all in the sport.
All sports.
So if the
All in this sport.
But
So-
you don't manage that, though.
No,
the athletic
Do you?
director and the boosters,
Yeah.
depending on,
the AD does.
The check is written from my office. It is a process just like every expenditure in the district. When the athletic fees are deposited, they are put into the district funds. Mr. Waldman may be thinking of some school districts have a separate bank account. We do not.
Okay.
Ours goes into our bank account. It's kept in a separate account, not physically separate from the other money, but from an
Identify.
account standpoint, separate from the other money. If that money wants to be spent, then the secretary at that building will prepare a requisition online. It will go through its approval process. It will be approved by the AD, the principal, Dr. Klein will come to me to make sure that Dr. Klein approves for proper public purpose and the fact that that is a valid expenditure in that function. My office approves that those funds are there and can be paid. So then I approve it, the check is written on the district account.
It's actually a better setup than having some independent process outside
Oh,
the
yeah.
district where you now have the capability to manage what goes on.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
so in the case of when Glen SD High School replaced their volleyball net, that was not paid by the general fund of our money, instruction money, et cetera. That came out of the gate money possibly collected.
That came out of that sports,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, and went through that process. And when we talk about going forward in terms of what we have projected going forward, this is one of those areas where you may say I've not been conservative. I have just put an inflation rate of 2% on all of these. We know from past history that we had a 25% in our deductions to community school. So you know what, this may be a case in where I have not forecasted enough expenditures to cover that next year unless we do something to stem the tide. What happens in that case? We look to find budget efficiencies and savings in other areas. Go back to hoping that maybe the revenue estimates are a little, we watch this very closely. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that you can do is monthly, when you look at your revenues and your appropriations, it shows you, it tracks our spending and where we are in relation to that. Now, do the expenditures, do the appropriations exactly match the forecast? They do not, because the forecast is on a cash basis and the monthly financial statements are on a budget basis. Budget bases include encumbrances. So appropriations that were not spent, encumbrances turn into appropriations at the end of one fiscal year that were not spent, but were appropriations from a prior year, carry forward to the next year. So it's going to be very immaterial, but they're not going to match to the dollar because of the different bases that you're looking at. But we do, that's what we track, and that's what you're given every month. So you can look and see, where are we within our spending, right now, this month? Okay, and
Where do you get the CPI number?
Bureau of Labor Statistics for the greater Cincinnati area, that includes, it runs from Butler County to greater Cincinnati. It includes Claremont.
So it's a bogus number because they don't include food and fuel in their federal statistics.
Actually, I tell you, when I talk to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I'm actually using a very conservative CPI because I'm using a CPI index, and that measures goods. Actually, there's a staffing, salary, benefits factor that is higher than the CPI. Last time I looked at it, it was, because of benefits, it was up around 5% when this will be around 2%. So actually, I use a pretty conservative number, I think, by using the Consumer Price Index for Greater Cincinnati. I have had conversations with the people from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they do agree with me that this is a somewhat conservative number. Is it a perfect? No.
It's too low.
Yeah, I think CPI is too low, but I would agree the CPI is low, and the Bureau of Labor, like I say, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says since 75% of your budget is spent on salaries and wages, that perhaps the statistic you should be using is the increase or decrease in compensation. So unfortunately, they do not calculate that number for just this area. It's for a much wider region that includes us, Chicago, Pittsburgh. It's for a very large reason, so a very large region. So that's the reason I chose the CPI to be our benchmark. I mean, we have to have some sort of benchmark out there to see why we're saving, and that's why I picked that one. Is there a perfect one? No. I think it's the best one that we have, though.
You mentioned the $125,000 that had to be transferred.
Yes.
Do you anticipate that'll be an annual issue, or is that something that's being assessed now to determine
Well, I
what,
do.
what we may be dealing with in the future?
You know what? I think that I may have been somewhat conservative, well, not conservative in this case, because I've kept it a little low. As the number of our athletes leave and our revenues go down, we'll have to continue to assess the number of coaches that we have. The other thing that, as you just read with the performance audit report, they recommended that we move I am paying our ADs currently out of the general fund. They've recommended that I move a portion of their salaries to this 300 so that there's a better matching. So in that case, right now, the AD salaries are in salary. That will simply be a movement. But yeah, I'm very concerned about this number. And
But if there's not revenue coming into that 300 fund, it just means that
the
there's going to have to
transfer
be
goes out.
that transfer of funds.
Transfer of funds is going to have to continue, and less revenues is going to mean less coaches, we're going to have to continually assess this situation. And again, it's counterproductive. The higher the fees, the less people paying them.
Yep.
So it's a circle, and it's not an easy answer.
And who typically makes those decisions about how many coaches there are for respective teams? Is that a committee that does that, or?
It's the ADs made in conjunction with Dr. Klein and Dr. Moffett.
Okay.
But I know that when we looked at that, we were very, very low on the number of coaches or adults to students, and we take advantage, I know specifically like at the middle school level and high school level, that they have coaches that, like on the football team, we may only pay 2 coaches, but they may have 5 on staff, 3 that are volunteering their time.
That is the case, yes.
So if you look at the number, we look like we have a lot, but yet not everyone is paid.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And again, just one of the things that we look at to benchmark, do we spend too much? And you've seen this chart a million times before and probably see it quite a few from here on out, because it is one of my favorite charts to benchmark against. And the last information that we have available, the state average per pupil spent is $10,508. Now, keep in mind, that's the average that schools actually spend. The typical school district in the state of Ohio spends that. But the state says a basic education should cost is $5,745. So there's a wide difference between what schools actually spend to provide the programs and services that are necessary versus what the state would call basic education.
When will we get the most current data on that? I know they're usually a year behind, but when will we get 12, 13?
And that again, like most things with school funding, is a long answer. They're typically in the process of changing how they distribute this information, and they're going from actually having a cost, they want to have a ranking. Right now, those rankings are in draft form, and I'll be bringing that to you probably within the next 2 or 3 months whenever the state makes those numbers final.
I know a lot of people are commenting that they want to see new data. This appears old, and don't give us the same thing over and over again. Give us current information that clearly explains why you can't.
Yeah, we do always make sure that we have the latest information available out there, and you're right, sometimes the state comparable data is at least a year or 2 behind. When you get into comparable data from the State Department of Taxation, you can be 3 and 4 years behind, and the numbers that they use to actually in the calculations can be pretty old. That's true, but it's the latest information available. There's just a chart that shows your revenues versus expenditures, and you have copies of these charts behind tab number R. Cash balance, so as you can see, it's been a struggle. It's looking up a little bit for the next few years. And this is something that you've continually heard me harp on over the last few years, talking about what our cash reserves are and how by virtue of the state benchmark, they're dangerously low. This chart shows in true days cash ratio. You hear me talk about months. This just takes months and puts it into days. The state would like you to have anywhere from 60 to 90 days, 2 to 3 months. You've heard me say that many times. This chart just shows you how many days we have had in reserve and how many days we are forecasted to have in the future. So there you see that while our financial picture has greatly improved, it's nowhere close to being put into what the state would term a fiscally stable district. Certainly better than where we have been. Not where it needs to be, and not where they would expect a fiscally stable school district to be. And again, you will see that the tax advances that move from one year to another, in order to present a consistent analysis, I've put it back in the year it belongs in, and you just see that denoted on the chart. So that said, I kind of went fast there at the end. I realized I'm took up a lot more of my time than we planned to spend on this morning. But like I said, my purpose is just to kind of explain what you have here, answer a few questions. I think, let me know, this information too much? Would you like to see it at a higher level summary? Would you like more detail in some areas? Would you like to spend a day going through the state foundation formula and actually finding out where each number comes through and doing the calculations? So I'll let you take this with you and wait further directions. But like I say, do not forget that the forecast is a guide, it's a planning tool. Things could change next week, and the forecast change, and we'll keep you informed, and that's one of the things we do through our monthly reporting.
So on your enrollment by student demographic, when somebody asks me how many students we have enrolled in our district, right now, our number is 7902.
That's head count, and I did forget to mention, I was going to go over some statistical data, but since we've gone over our limit, I kind of was going to skip this for that. But yeah, that's actually, that's past history, past enrollment. That's actually head counts who's sitting in our classrooms.
So earlier I see head counts of 8,300, 8,500, 8,600 for the 13-14 year. Why, I don't understand the discrepancies.
Okay, that discrepancy is going to be what I have here for you in the statistical data. That's who's actually sitting in our classroom. The state pays us for all those kids that are educated elsewhere. So the ADM, average daily membership, that you see on the foundation report includes kids that are not sitting in our classrooms.
So those are
So-
homeschoolers? Those are?
No, it
programs?
does not include homeschoolers. Those are open enrollment. Those are kids who are placed elsewhere, whose parents may reside here but are placed elsewhere due to court judicial opinions.
Okay.
Includes kids that, for special ed reasons, may be going to a program somewhere else. So, I'm sorry?
JVS.
JVS
Is that in there?
actually,
Okay.
no, JVS is actually in our count in a different way. But what happens is, remember, the state pays us for those kids, and then we take the state share and our share and put it out. So yes, the ADM on this payment report includes kids that are educated elsewhere. What I've included for you in the back here are who's sitting in our classrooms.
And so this number, the 7,900, would be what we would figure administration needs for, teacher needs for, busing needs for.
There you go. Good
that
way to
kind of
put it.
stuff.
Correct.
Okay.
There you go.
Right, I mean,
Good way
that's
to
the
put it.
number, how many teachers we need should be based on that, not on the 83 or 86 or whatever.
Correct.
That does not, that 80, the higher
The
number,
inflated number.
whatever it is, doesn't include parochial schools that, I mean, if I'm sending my child to St. Thomas More,
Right, does not include parochial.
that's not part of that 8,300.
That is not.
But
It
that
isn't.
explains the variation in numbers that you see, because depending on what is being reported is what number is reflected in that report.
It's, exactly, and as you can see from this mountain of data, it's no wonder the people sit out there and say, what? Because general fund balance alone, at any point in time, I have 3 general fund balances. I have a cash basis, I have a budget basis, and I have a gap basis that takes into account what's payable and receivable. So there's 3 different fund balances at any point in time. There's a lot of data out there, right, and it's no wondering it's confusing.
So this would be an accurate number for us to quote to people when we are asked, how many students do you have enrolled? That would be the number that we would want to reflect, would be those that are actually sitting in our classrooms. Correct.
Actually, I typically use the number on the 5-year forecast because, I'm sorry, the number on the foundation payment, because those are the students that West Claremont is responsible for. And don't forget, there is money going out of our budget for that 8,300 because the state's only paying 41.6% of the 5,745 that march out the door. West Claremont's paying the other, I don't know if I can do the math in my head that quickly, 59%.
Okay.
But when we
Right.
look at that other chart, where'd they go? That we are actually,
Again, we're paying out more
Then we're receiving.
than we're receiving on those extra
Right.
300.
Paying the state share
Students.
plus the local share
Right.
for that student.
But, Mr.
but the difference between that, we're spending $8,200 per student. So that extra between the 57 and the 82, that extra
from taxes.
$2,500 we're keeping.
Comes from taxes.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah,
but, I mean, if we
Goes into
lose,
our general fund.
if we lose a student, then we have to pay the difference between the 5,700 that we're supposed to have and the 41% of that we actually get. But then we're also, somewhere we're getting funding
Now,
above and beyond that's not being taken from the state.
Well, what you're looking at is what we spend per pupil, and I didn't include the local revenue of what we actually collect per pupil. So the number you're looking for, I'll have to go back and pull those local revenues per pupil. The number that you're talking about, property taxes we get per pupil versus property taxes going out, and I'll bring that to you.
But it's not that great a loss because we're getting taxes elsewhere that we're not losing.
No,
No.
We'll bring those local numbers. We're not getting state dollars. We are only,
We're losing state dollars, but we're not sending the local dollars out the door with these students.
we are.
we are. We may not be spending,
We're not spending as much on these students going out the door as we're spending on the other students within the district.
that would be correct.
That would be a fair statement,
That would be a
yes.
fair statement.
So, I mean,
Yes.
the funding is it's not as dire as saying we're losing 59% of the state funding for every student we lose, because we're not losing all the funding for those people.
Well, you're correct. If you have a classroom of 30 students, you're able to effectively deliver that education at a lower percentage per student. Where if you only had 19 kids in that class, it's gonna cost you
Well,
more
then
to
we-
operate that class, because that operating dollar is still the same. You're paying that teacher the same amount. You're collecting less
We
money
shouldn't
for
be-
the students.
Yeah, but we shouldn't be having any classes that only have 19.
No. I was using it as an extreme to make a point there. 30 versus 27, you still have fewer students
Fixed cost.
to fund that teacher.
Okay, and with that, as you'll notice, we didn't use all the tabs that we needed, so what other information you'd like, we'll be happy to add to the book. And thank you very much for your attention to a very lengthy topic, and I look forward to your comments and questions as to what you'd like to talk about in the future. Thank you.
We'll call a recess. We'll call a recess for 5 minutes.
We're going to recess for 5 minutes.
Back at,
We'll come back
25
at
after.
25 after.
thanks.
Thanks.
Ms. Sanborn? Mr. Merchant?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Waldman?
Yes.
Mrs. Brinkman?
With the time we have remaining this morning, we want to try to start the process of prioritizing direction. Before we get into that, I do want to give you 2 updates about information we've talked about or that you are aware has been coming. First off, the board this past Wednesday, as you know, approved blizzard bag options. That proposal resolution plan was sent to the state Thursday morning. I have yet to get a response back on their approval. I expect that to be probably the beginning of next week. I really don't anticipate there being an issue with their approval simply because it's in the template. We approved the template that they've approved for other districts, so I think that will go forward. I do also want to mention that the extension of snow days, calamity makeup days, which has sat at 5, the legislation has moved out of the House committee to add another 4 days to that. It will not get voted on at the House level until, I believe, the 12th of February. That's when the House will be voting again. If it's approved out of the House, then it'll go to the Senate, and they'll have to go through that process as well. So I'm really anticipating we won't know anything about the extension of those days until late in February, probably.
March.
So the good news is, we have Plan B in place. Should we end up having any more calamity days, we can make use of that until the state announces what it's going to do about extending those calamity days for us.
We have a plan for this week on Tuesday and Wednesday. It looks like it's gonna be bad weather. If we have snow days, can we move forward with doing those as blizzard bags?
Yes, we'll be prepared to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, from what I'm gathering, we've gone from 14 inches of snow to maybe rain.
A dust.
They're still kind of all over the place. So You'll understand why my decision about closing school is a challenging one, depending on who you listen to and what channel you're looking at. The other thing that I wanted to make mention to you today is I've provided all of the board members with a report from Future Think. As part of our work with the Ohio School Facilities Commission, we've had an updated enrollment projection study done. Because we're working with the Ohio Facilities Commission, that study was done at no charge to West Claremont. And you'll see just on the cover of this is a very brief summary. And Mr. Lewis was talking about enrollments. We just had a conversation about enrollment. They are projecting for West Claremont, should where we're at right now continue, and we continue to see students leaving our district, they're projecting for the 18-19 school year that we would see about 7,400 students. So you'll see that number continues to drop if we remain on the same course. And actually, Mr. Dyer had a conversation with Tracy Healy, the president of Future Think, and the reason for those, because we've talked about, well, if we were to turn things around, be able to keep our students, maybe enrollment even goes back up, they have to base their projections for state purposes and our purposes on trends that are taking place right now. And our current trend is losing students. Should we be able to keep those students or stem that tide flowing out, then we would be able to re-look at this and get updated projections based on that. So I'll share that information with you. We really don't have time to go through all of it this morning, but I'll leave it for you to study. Pretty extensive enrollment projection report. There's a lot of information in there. And I will say that if, of course, again, based on the trends that are taking place right now, if you extend that out 10 years to 2023, 24, we're down to just over 7,000 students. So as Mr. Waldman has said, as Mr. Merchant has said over time, we need to find the way to stem that tide of outflow versus students staying here in West Claremont. So I'll leave that with you, and as questions come up, feel free to get in touch with me. I'll try to answer them as best I can.
I'm just looking at these numbers and the ones versus the CUP report. One that stands out is like the CUP report says our median income in the township or in the district is 34.3, and this is showing almost that was 12, and this is showing 13. We jumped to 56.
Yeah.
That's like,
Well, remember all of these
Didn't jump like
reports,
that.
CUP report, this report, are snapshots at the time the report's done, number one. And number two, we're not always looking at exactly the same, not us. Folks are not always looking at the same information when they pull these things together. It's another piece of data, it's another data point for us to consider as we move forward.
Are we going to talk anytime in the near future? Is it in the plan for us to talk about what we can, start doing to try to keep these children within?
Actually, that's our next item on the agenda. So we've got about 25 minutes to work through some things. As we've discussed, and this is the case with any new board, folks have come to the board with a variety of ideas of what we need to do and what our direction should be as we move forward. So that being said, we really need to identify the interest of the board as a whole. Remember, we may have individual interests, but it is a board as a whole interest about where we're headed. By doing so, we've got a much better chance of not only accomplishing the board's goals over the course of the next year, but also moving the district forward. Today, I'd like to take a little bit of time to surface some of those goals or interests that board members have. This, of course, will shape the work that the administration is focused on over the course of the next year. The concern that I've got, and I've had conversations in pairs or individually with a lot of board members, and if I were to have written all of the things down that we've talked about individually and in pairs, I probably have a list of about 20 to 25 things that we want to look at. And that's certainly fine, but we've got to realize too, to be effective and to get the job done, we're really going to have to prioritize that list so that we can focus on the big things first, that the board comes up with as a whole, and then be successful in accomplishing those things as we move forward. So really what I wanted to do, and I don't know that we'll get to the actual prioritization today, when we were together Wednesday, I said I really wanted to surface and write down thoughts from all 5 board members about what our priorities should be. We will type that up after we're done today and share it with all of the board members. And then we will come back around to putting some priorities to that, because at some point, we're going to have to, as a group, determine what we're going to go after first, what we're going to address first. So does that make sense as far as
Yeah.
process is concerned? Board's comfortable with that?
Yes.
All right, so at this point, what I would do is suggest that we open it up. To be fair, I think we go in a bit of a rotation so that we're not just shouting things out. And again, I think part of the purpose behind doing the financial information, sharing that, knowing where we are a little bit better on the financial end of things, gives us an opportunity to look at what the priorities, what makes sense maybe as priorities. And then we'll go back as an administration and put dollar figures to different things that you all are suggesting. And then we can share that publicly so that we can make some determinations about what our next steps are. Okay?
So this is our opportunity to ask questions that you'll come back at some time later and
Right. and-
provide information on.
Right, some of this, I realize that some of this list may be questions that need to be answered.
Yeah.
Some of this list may be, here's something that we need to try to figure out in order to stem the tide of folks flowing out of our district, okay? So
Okay.
it's really what's on your minds, I want to capture that, and then we'll sift through that as a group as we move forward to come up with the priorities. And of course, if there are questions, we'll provide that information back to the board as quickly as we can. So with that being said, Ms. Sanborn, as the president, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
And we'll go down the line and just keep doing that in rotation so that we're all getting a fair shake at making suggestions. So I'll start with you, if that's okay.
Sure. I looked at the West Claremont Local Ohio School report card, and I feel we need to look real seriously at the third grade reading level, K through third grade. I think that if we continue to lose students to other districts, if we continue not to bring these students up to the grade level that they need to be to perform in the best that they can perform, that's going to impact us with House Bill 59. As you know, if we don't bring the grades up from an F in some school districts, that those students will be allowed to receive a voucher and move out of our district to parochial or other homeschooling or other areas of performance.
And just to summarize, you just focused in and mentioned third grade, in particular because of the third grade reading guarantee. But in general, you're talking about elevating academic performance across all grade levels.
Right.
Would that be accurate?
That would be accurate, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Merchant?
One of the issues that's always been before us as a board is that we keep wanting to cut, and I'm right at this moment in my overall learning process that cuts aren't a positive thing. We need to reallocate in many cases the existing funds that are here to meet the goals that we have for stopping the bleed. I heard Tammy say that, and I believe the same thing. We've got to stop these students leaving. And one of the ways that, when I remember talking to Dr. Brooks about this, was that we've got to come up with a product, something that's sellable. And IB was one of those products that we had here that kept certain students around, but it doesn't keep them all around. I feel that one of the things that you and I had discussed, that this all-day kindergarten may be a good aspect to bring back to reinsure the voting population, that we are trying to make efforts to include and increase the students' ability to stay with us and make them a home. And all-day kindergarten, I believe we need to find the funding for.
So taking a look at the reallocations of funds so that we can stem the flow of folks
Yes.
going out of our district. In particular, you mentioned IB as a
As a
jewel
showcase
for
gem.
us to draw kids.
Yes.
And specifically mentioned all-day kindergarten as well, and finding a way to
Fund
make
it.
sure that we can keep our kindergartners here instead of going elsewhere.
Yes.
Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Mr. Lewis?
I wouldn't stop with the third grade performance. I think we need to look at the way we're teaching, period, because based on whatever the latest model is or report is, 38% of our students that supposedly graduate from West Claremont can't handle college level without remedial. So it starts from the third grade with reading, but, you know, by the time they leave here, they should be able to handle college work if they think they're college eligible. And that's, you know,
College readiness?
college
Is that a-
readiness. And-
Is
and
that,
not,
I just
you
want
know,
to make sure that's a term we all agree is
That's
what
fine,
we're talking
yeah,
about.
that's fine. It's pretty embarrassing that, you know, 2 out of every 5 kids that graduate, that go to an in-state college, aren't ready to go to college. And how did they graduate in the first place? And I've helped grade some of the standardized tests from across the nation. I'm surprised that, you know, well, the state of Ohio graduation test, the school, of 75% of the students on some parts of it get 32% right, that's considered passing. It's like, that's, you know, as low as 32. The highest bottom line is, I think, 57%. It's like, that's not passing in anybody's mind, but to make us look good, they've lowered the standards so much, and I think we need to not lower the standards, we need to raise our standards so these kids walk out here and not able to do the basics, read, do the math that's necessary, and comprehension. And that's what our job is, I thought, is, you know, to prepare these kids for life. They're going to vocational school, that's where they go. But if they're going to be out of here and say they're going to pass an Ohio graduation test, and that says that they've gained all this knowledge that they should have to get into their first year of college and they can't do it, then that test is totally worthless.
Well, and our, just a editorial, our Ohio graduation test right now is a minimum bar test that is usually passed or supposed to be passed the first time by sophomores. And so what you're saying makes sense about what we're expecting of our kids and how we're preparing them. And I should throw in here, it's not a West Claremont issue
Oh, it's
solely.
just- it's
a
across
state
the
of-
state.
It's a state of Ohio issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. Thank you. Mr. Waldman?
I think just to add on to part of what Mark had spoken about, with the all-day kindergarten, I think the emphasis should be all day, every day kindergarten. And then what ancillary costs are going to be associated with that relative to, do we need more staff? What transportation impact is that going to be? And then one of the things that I would very much like to see this board make a decision on sooner than later is how are we going to, in some semblance, start to bring back our special programs, art, music, PE. And it may not be what it was, but there's got to be some balance between where we're at today and where we were. And what does that look like? What costs are associated with that? And maybe in more than one tier. If we do this, it's going to be this much. If we do this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mrs. Brickman?
Well, going last, I
We're
share.
gonna make another round,
No, that was not my point. I echo many of the sentiments that have already been said. I think it's important that we find a way to bring back art, music, and PE. I think that that's probably our biggest and highest level of focus, because I think that that is the biggest factor that's causing our students to leave our district. I think that we need to also take a look at what we're doing and how we're doing it on the administrative side. I think that there's still opportunity for insurance premiums to be lowered. Is that looking again at the consortium? Is that looking at, are we offering too rich of plans? Could we do it cheaper? I think that there's some opportunity there. I think it's also important for us to look at the curriculum, as already said. I think it's important that we, as a board, as a district, continue to build stronger relationships with our community. And that would include our non-supporters. Let that be politically driven or economically driven, whatever it is, we need to build a stronger relationship. And with that also is a stronger relationship with our teachers' union. I think we need to be viewed as a team versus separate entities with their own agendas. We need to do it more as a team approach.
I took the liberty of adding employees in addition to teachers, because I would assume that that's across the board.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, made it through one cycle. And it's okay if there's a pass. There's nothing wrong with a pass if everything's been listed already. But we'll go back to Ms. Sanborn and see what other items you have.
I would like to relook at the state auditor's report, make sure we've covered all the areas we need to cover as a board.
You're talking about the performance audit?
The
that was just-
Performance audits from Dave Yo's office.
Was just finished in
Mhm.
December. Mr. Merchant?
Yes, Mr. Dyer and I have had a few conversations regarding facilities. We've got some glaring issues out there with regards to asbestos. We've got glaring issues with roof leakage. We've seen water main breaks. We've seen a lot of things that are really gonna impact our budget in one way or another. And we're gonna have to watch out for that. But I believe we need to put our heads together, and being on that committee, to put together a facilities master plan that hasn't been done in a long time.
And as we just discussed before we started this process, we are engaged with the Ohio Facilities Commission around doing just that, putting a master plan together. This is one piece of it, enrollment projections. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Dyer, maybe he's slipped out. We have had a team, am I correct, in that a team from the state has come through and gone through all of our buildings at this point and are preparing their reports around conditions?
Yes, the assessment and the walkthrough portion, we're waiting for that to be reviewed.
Okay, great. So a lot of that work is, we're moving towards right now.
When is that to be expected, the completion thereof, the report?
Then we should get that within the next, probably 3 to 4 weeks, and then we'll start the master planning portion of that.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis? I'll apologize for the hand waving.
No, I'm not worried
Not
about
my
him.
forte.
You couldn't even read mine, so. Most of what I'm most concerned about has already been listed. I mean, all-day kindergarten may be a pipe dream, but I think getting the kids back in there every day by half-day has to be done somehow. We've got to find the funds to get them back in there at least half-day every day, because it's not helping the third grade reading. And the one thing that you don't control, the teachers don't control, that we have no control over, is the home environment. And if these kids don't come in prepared to learn and they don't get the help that they need, I mean, you read the studies about how great Head Start is. Well, depending on the home environment, whatever gains they've had before they start kindergarten on Head Start is totally lost by the time they hit the third grade. And we need to find some way to engage these parents to help them understand how important it is their part of the education process is, because if they're not prepared by the time they hit kindergarten, they're lost.
Woefully behind.
And there's programs out there that we have a library, a good library over here. We have, and there's things there's things that can be done, but we probably, I don't know, can we have some sort of forums with these parents to try to get them? I mean, if you look at the things that make you successful in life, you know, a single mom doesn't cut it for her or her children. And if you want to succeed, you get your education first, and then you get married, and then you have children. No, before you get married, you have a job, and then you get married and have children. And those, you know, there's, I think it was Harvard recently released something about the fact that, you know, the children of two-parent households succeed so much better. And not only that, but if you're a two-parent household where most everybody else is single, the neighborhood decreases your ability to succeed. So I think an important thing that's growing out of our bailiwick, but we need to try to find some way to engage is to get the parents behind teaching these kids the basics before they hit school.
And I want to make sure that, as it pertains to us and how far our arms can reach, I put down engaged parents, and really that was around kindergarten readiness. How ready are they when they arrive to us? Is that,
Yes,
am I capturing that correctly?
yes, and, it extends past that.
Well,
obviously,
I don't
but-
disagree, but
But if we can get
sometimes
them,
our arms are too.
if we can get them ready for kindergarten, that's a real leg up.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Walden?
I know this is probably not in the big scheme of things and a major item, but I think it's important that as a board, we have someone that serves as a legislative liaison to be able to bring to the board updates on current things that are going on with the state. For instance, there's a significant issue before the House right now related to new standards for diabetes, and the implications of that for every school district in the state are really significant. And we've got to know what's going on at the state level as well. Secondary, as far as items that I don't want to say that we are or aren't doing these things, but to me,
Sure.
I think it's important that we really look at consortiums when it comes to our healthcare. There are a lot of options out there, and I know ultimately that means more work for somebody in the district, but
That's okay.
I
It's important.
I think there's a value in assessing that on a regular basis. And the same thing would apply to, as we look at those outside services that we pay for, that we utilize or go through some type of a bid process relative to those items, including what we pay for our liability insurance. All of those things, I think, are subject to getting out into a format where we can get more than one bid to try to do what's best in the interest of the
Sure.
funding issues that we have.
Did that capture that?
Yep.
Not that you can read it. I'm not gonna. Mrs. Brinkman?
I've previously said everything I think I could, except for I did come up with something else. Several years ago, we had a program called Ohio Reads. As an extension of Ohio Reads, we welcomed and invited, encouraged grandparents and other volunteers to come into the building to do some work with our higher level students, but more importantly are the strugglers. And I think that we've lost that. And I think that that ties back into the community involvement and support, but I think that it would be important for us to try to get that reinstated in our buildings. I think we've lost that in many areas.
Trying to think about how we put this down. Ohio Reads is a specific program, but we're talking about outreach to our community to help with
As an arm of intervention,
Community volunteering.
absolutely. You get the extracurricular, the extra help, and it doesn't cost us anything.
Like we're doing with the libraries right now.
That's all I have.
Okay. We'll go quick. Anybody else have anything else they'd like to add to this preliminary list?
Well, one thing I think we ought to look at is stop advertising that we're unprotected in most of these school buildings and take down the gun-free zone signs if we have them. Whether we have kids in there or we have somebody armed in there or not, that just says, hey, nut job, come in here and shoot us up.
Is that going to send a negative, and I'm not being argumentative, I'm just asking, is that going to send a negative message to our students who may be familiar with that sign at the front door
Well, I think
that
we
may
ought to
view
really,
that as a safety in their mind? I'm talking about little kids, first, second graders, when they're used to coming in, and are they going to ask, why was that sign removed? Does that mean that we have guns now on campus?
well, we ought to look, we should seriously ought to look at concealed carriage for staff members at the schools anyway. We're leaving them totally unprotected right now, and with the advertisement that you're unprotected, come in here and do something, and
And our goal today is not to debate. or have
No, no.
merits or demerits around any one thing. It's to try to list things. We will, believe me, get to a conversation around every item up here once we prioritized and we know where to go first. So I appreciate that conversation. It's one we'll postpone, if that's okay, until we bring it to the table to have conversation. I do want to see if there's anybody else, because we do have to close this down at noon. There's other folks coming in. Wanted to see if there's anything else on this preliminary list that folks wanted to have listed.
I have an additional item. Our educational service centers, I know in many cases we contract services through them, and I think it's important that folks take a look at whether there's a value of contracting that service out versus having it in-house, and what that threshold point is to make that happen, particularly as we look, and I don't know where the district is at this point, but I know there's been some significant funding changes related to preschool services, and I know in our district, we just pulled a lot of those services back in at a significant savings, so just kind of an overall scope of that whole issue. And I think we now have the option too, that we can look at other ESCs. We're not restricted to one individual. If somebody's got a better package somewhere, we can certainly look at that, so.
And quite honestly, I'll just throw this in. We right now work with both Claremont and Hamilton County ESC to see
Okay.
where we get the best deals on
Yeah.
things.
All right.
Any other items we'd like to throw up today?
Performance evaluations for the teachers.
Performance evaluations for teachers?
Yeah, and I think the call for them to be graded 50% on the standardized test is detrimental to our students. They end up teaching the test instead of teaching the students. We need to really look at how we evaluate our teachers' performance.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Waldman?
I'm gonna bring up the issue again of some kind of board development. I think with 3 new board members and 2 members that have 2 years, that's an important dynamic in terms of us being successful and moving forward. And there are multiple options for that, but I think it's
Sure.
something that needs to be on the table.
Okay, thank you. Others?
Board retreat,
I'm sorry,
board retreat,
board retreat. Can I slide that under board development?
yes.
Okay. That may be a means to the end of board development, so.
And I don't know where the money will come from, but expanded busing is one thing that will win the community back.
Transportation.
I mean, that's what I've heard from far too many. And that's one of the reasons we're losing students.
We found that in the survey work we did last spring, yes.
I think we'd all agree with that.
Yeah, we may have unanimous thinking around that. Well, what I'd like to do, and we do need to wrap things up, what I'd like to do is, our staff will take this list and type it up, probably pretty verbatim, and send it out to all of the board members. We aren't going to have time today to actually prioritize, but that may not be a bad thing. I think if you would like to, or what I'd suggest is that we send that out to you. You take a look at the items that are on there. Maybe there's some additional items we didn't discuss today, but we'll go through a prioritization process very soon so that we have a course charted for the future. With this list, even not being prioritized, my staff can go back and start looking and starting to put some costs to different things so that we're working a little bit ahead of the game, and we have that information ready when it's time to have the discussion, okay? I do appreciate the work today, and certainly Mrs. Cropper, while she took more than twice what she said she was going to take time-wise, I think it was very valuable time spent, and it gave us an opportunity to start getting a picture of the finances in school districts in Ohio, and in particular West Claremont. I am very pleased to say that when I look at the 5-year forecast from 1 year ago today, we've gone from significant deficits, I think it was 2017, a projection of minus $21 million, to the current one, which is right around $7 million in the black. That is a huge swing. And when I talk about that swing, with my colleagues, with other folks out in the community. We've made very strategic moves since February 1st of last year to bring that into line. And I have to thank our staff for taking a lot of concessions and moving us that direction. Quite honestly, that's probably the biggest chunk over time of how we've been able to turn what was a dramatically low balance, in the red balance, to a positive in the black balance as we move forward on the 5-year forecast. So really congratulations and thank you to those folks that have been a part of that and making the decisions over the course of the last year. We have done a good job of getting the ship back to an upright state.
I'd like to add to that and say thank you to you for having a fresh set of eyes, having a different vision, and bringing us to where we are.
Well, the work isn't, thank you, but I don't know that the work is done. And so and quite honestly, I don't know that the work is ever done. But we've got to continue down that positive path as opposed to where we've been in this district in the past.
Yeah, when you
And
see
again,
the
it takes a lot of people working on it.
When you see the differences in a year ago and today, it speaks volumes for the leadership we have here
Absolutely.
and for our bargaining units and the sacrifices that they've made. And that's very unusual, and to have some of the things that happen.
I had a conversation with the superintendent Thursday night and said, they asked about financial forecasts, and I said, well, 17, we've gone from 21 million in the red to 7 million in the black, and they were astounded.
Yeah,
And that's due to the good work of the folks here in West Claremont.
no
So,
question.
with that being said, I do need to update the board about one personnel issue, and I would like to, Ms. Sanborn, request that we have a very brief, no more than 5 minutes executive session so I can share that information with the board.
Okay. Per the Ohio Revised Sunshine Law 12122 requires that a motion of executive session state specifically which of the proposals for which the executive session is to be held, and it's to consider the discipline of a public employee or official. I make a motion that we adjourn to executive session, and I'll need a second.
Second.
Mr. Lewis? Mrs. Cropper, roll call?
Ms. Sanborn?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Merchant?
Yes.
Mrs. Brinkman?
Yes.
Mr. Waldman?
Yes.
And I'll add to that, I do not expect us to come back into public session after we're done with that.
Thank you.
Do we hold?
Meeting adjourned.